where time does not exist and the only thing that matters is film. I'm Cole. That is Jay. We come to you tonight to one of our something new, sort of breaking new ground here, and that we've covered various foreign films, but those have been limited to Europe and Asia. And this is our first foray, I believe, into South American film. This is the Brazilian film City of God from 2002, Portuguese language title Cidade de Deus. And it was released in 2003 in the U.S. or internationally through, I think, Miramax. And this movie was somewhat of a darling at the time when it came out. It had a lot of praise, did pretty well on the festival circuit, and had some nominations even for some Academy Awards. I don't think it won any. But yeah, this movie had a lot of buzz. And I guess that's why it wound up on TV, which is how I saw it. I saw it in 2004 on CBC. And I can't really remember the circumstances, except because it's hard to say if I'd heard about it and that's why I watched it, or if just something about it grabbed me and kept me watching. I'm not sure, because it's just been so long. But that's how I saw it. And from all these years in between, I hadn't seen it again. I just sort of had sort of faint, vague memories of it. And one of my memories was like that at part time, it was one of the only times in my life where I had trouble following a subtitled movie, because the subtitles were not well done in the version I saw. They were yellow and slow, and I had trouble figuring out, not that yellow's a problem, I just remember them standing out because they were yellow for some reason. And sometimes there was confusion. I couldn't tell who was saying what. But I managed to watch this movie on Amazon Prime this time around, and the subtitles seemed to be much better. I didn't have trouble, and it worked out. I managed to watch the movie twice, once last week and again today. It's pretty much as good as I remember it personally, although it's still different kind of than the way I remembered it. Part of me wonders, I probably didn't see it right from the very start the first time I saw it. I probably missed at least a few minutes at the start, although I did see most of it. And yet, I guess I just remember the second half of the movie better than the first, although I know I saw more than just half of it. I saw almost all of it. I might have missed 10, maybe 15 minutes tops of the beginning when I first saw it, but it's interesting because it doesn't exactly line up with my memories. There's very few scenes. I remember the overarching plot, and I remember a few of the characters, but yeah, this is just one of those cases for me personally where my memory isn't lining up too well with what I'm actually seeing on the screen. Although I don't think I was confusing it with any other movies, but this was a movie that we thought about doing ages ago that just probably got pushed back the way other stuff does, and I'm just really happy for an excuse to revisit it and see it again. And I was thrilled. I guess I felt the timing was right when I noticed that it was on Amazon Prime for myself. So I was like, here's an opportunity. So finally, we're getting around to it.
Yeah, I went ahead and bought it on Amazon Prime because I couldn't find it anywhere else to watch.
Mm.
It's like just a few dollars difference in buying it and renting it. So I was like, yeah, might as well. Well, have it. But I know I eventually watched it. I hadn't heard anything about it, but it was on the it was like number 3 on the IMDb, highest user rating
Mm-hmm.
for
I
a
remember
while. It
that
may
too.
still be up there, but
And that would have
yeah.
been back when I was always on IMDb.
Mm-hmm.
So that might have been why I watched it when I came across it on TV. Maybe I'd come across it that way. That seems likely because this is, again, 2004. I would have been, right in the middle of that stuff.
Oh, so you saw it soon after it came out then?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I probably watched it maybe 10 years ago for the first time.
Yeah. But I mean, that was the only time I saw it until this until this week.
Mm-hmm.
So all
Yeah,
those
me
years
too.
later, I never really had another opportunity to watch it. I often people would talk about it and say it was a good movie, but over the years, I obviously forgot some stuff. But I'm pleased, in watching it again, that it holds up. That I still like it probably every bit as much as I liked it before. And the circumstances of it kind of make it kind of impressive, considering this would be a fairly low budget movie by today's standards, about 3 million. I think it says like $3.3 million budget, which is pretty small. And also the fact that there's a lot of authenticity because the movie doesn't really use real actors. Like they're almost all just people brought out of the area for the purposes of the movie. There's a bit of controversy that comes along with that too that maybe we'll talk about later. As far as I could tell, the only character that actor that had like real acting experience was the guy who played the character Carrot.
Mm.
He was the only one. And also, in hindsight, this is funny because I saw this sometime in 2004, but I couldn't tell you when. It might have been early 2004, late 2004. I'm not sure, but I can just pin down because of where I saw it, where I was living and stuff. But also in 2004, one of my favorite movies ever hit the theater, and I saw in the theater, which is The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, which I love. And there's a common actor in both those movies, but I didn't notice at the time, and that's the guy that plays Knockout Ned in this movie is a noted Brazilian musician, more so musician. I guess Seu Jorge is how you say his name, and he has like a non-speaking role in Life Aquatic, where he's basically just he's part of the crew, but he's never talking. But he's just always playing acoustic guitar, and he's always playing Portuguese versions of David Bowie songs. I like it so much. I own the soundtrack, so there's like 5 or 6 Portuguese acoustic covers of him. So that's kind of cool. I didn't make the connection back then though. So because yeah, I would have probably seen those movies a few months apart from each other, and I wouldn't have recognized it and made the connection. But it's kind of cool. So I think he's probably out of all the people that have been in the movie, the person that's achieved the most fame. And again, it's more so as a musician than an actor in his case. And of course, they made a sequel to this in 2007 called City of Men that I've never seen. And also, there was a City of Men TV series too. So there's lots of further stuff that I have not delved into yet.
Yeah, there was also another one I came across. It was like a continuation of this film. Um, it was like City of God, and then I had a subtitle.
Ah.
It was like the revenge of somebody or something like that.
That doesn't sound quite as good, but you never know.
Well, it's directed by someone else. That's why I'm probably not going to bother with it.
All right. So this movie had 2 directors. That was Fernando Mariales and Katia Lund. They co-directed it, and it was adapted from a novel of the same name from 1997. And the novel itself is based, at least loosely, on some real events. So this basically traces some history from the 60s into the beginning of the 80s in a part of on sort of the outskirts of there you go, of Rio de Janeiro in in uh in the area which would have been called a favela, which are just sort of like kind of like rundown shanty towns. We see the evolution of it a little bit because the movie sort of it starts somewhere and then it jumps back. When we're in the late 60s, we see that it's just being built. What the place referred to as the City of God is at first just being built. It's all dirt roads, not much infrastructure. They don't have electricity yet. It was hastily put up because they just had all these people that didn't have anywhere to live. It doesn't really mention in the movie, but a lot of them had been displaced by flooding, which is one of the reasons why. And then, of course, as the movie goes on, we see that it becomes much more urbanized and gets swallowed up and is part of Rio de Janeiro. And becomes very urban. But at the start, yeah, it's kind of on the outskirts. It's dirt road. There's no. I hope I did. Did I lose you, or did you just adjust something? That's not good. Well, I'll keep talking just because it says we're still live. So okay, so yeah, so those areas are called favelas. Oh, there you are. Lost you for a second.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
So they're housing colonies, and they're bleak but not horrible places. People sort of living on the edge of society, kids growing up there or engaging in petty crime. But as we see how this works, it gets more serious as time goes by. So we got a main character who's our narrator, Rocket. And since this is not an English language film, some of the names aren't the same as they were originally. It would have been Buscape, which directly translates to firecracker, but I think Rocket was probably works better in English. So there's a few things like that where they just make some adjustments. The one that I think was kind of funny is Knockout Ned himself, because his nickname would have been quite different it was Mane Gatina, which was Chicken Manny. Then they changed that, of course, because for anglophones, chicken would have been associated with being like a coward or something, or a pussy, whatever you want to say. Whereas in Brazilian culture, chicken as a nickname for a guy meant like he was sort of a ladies' man and popular with women. So that was something I guess they couldn't figure out how to do, so they just made it Knockout Ned, which works well enough, I suppose. So yeah, there's a few things here. So pretty much every character in the movie, except for I think the girl that Rocket has the crush on, everybody else is identified by nicknames, which in a way makes her name was Angelica, which in a way makes I think it easier to remember them because this movie kind of has the recipe for being a confusing at least first watch because it's in another language, it's subtitled, and you've got a lot of characters. So sometimes it can be easy to get lost in movies like this and mix people up and not be able to keep track of them. But for me personally, at least, the fact that they all had nicknames made them easier to remember. So I never really got overwhelmed by the characters watching this, and I think having them, have nicknames that are just simple English words, really helped me out and made it easier to keep track of them and remember who was who.
Yeah, one of the only real complaints I have is the ages of the kids when they're older seems to be off. Like the guy that plays little Z,
Yeah,
he looks like he's about 30, and then Rocket, it looks to be the age he's playing, maybe 15, 16, something like that.
yeah. They never really make it clear how many years pass by either. You can tell, like for that prologue part in the '60s, that our main characters are about 12,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get into say the early '70s, and they're all supposed to be about 17, 18. And then they don't really give you a good sense of how much time passes during that because I mean if you refer to the book, the events would end just around the start of the '80s, but if that was the case then the characters would be reaching their 30s by then. So yeah, so it's not perfect as far as establishing a timeline goes. It's kind of loose, which I'm okay with. It's not terrible. It still tells the story it needs to, but maybe that was the problem because of the actors they cast or whatever. I don't know. But that is true. It's kind of loose as far as the timeline goes. It's kind of vague, but it works well enough. You know that it takes place over several years at least. So, and you see some of the changes that are implemented. The area itself, of course, becoming urban and infested with crime, and also just the characters themselves aging a little bit. But as you said, some of the characters seem to age a lot more than others, and it just depends upon the way the actors look. Some maybe just look young for their age or old for their age. Plus, they never really exactly say who is how old somebody is compared to somebody else. It's just sort of again a general thing. It starts where you have characters like Rocket, Benny, and Little Z, who was Little Dice at the time. They would have all been at about 12, and then they've got the older generation, where we get the first section is talks about the older generation. Two of them being brothers of them. Let's see, Rocket's brother was what was Rocket's brother?
Shaggy?
No,
No.
he wasn't Shaggy.
Um, no, Rocket's brother was the. Shoot, I can't remember.
Goose.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
right.
so they were Shaggy, Goose, and Clipper. Shaggy was Benny's brother, and Goose was Rocket's brother. Clipper's kind of the least. He's the only one that doesn't really have much to do because he's the guy that, after getting spooked by what happened in the aftermath of their heist, he decides he's done with crime, and that, as far as we know, pretty much saves his life. He says, "I'm going to go join the church," and then we never see him again. We're like, I guess he got out okay. Pretty much everybody else, over time, they'll meet some sort of fate. And in the case of the other two of the what were they called, the Tender Trio, they die, they're dead before the time jump.
Yeah, Goose got caught with another guy's wife
Yeah,
and basically was forced to leave town.
yeah,
And that guy killed
and
his wife, like, and buried her in the house, and we never really touched back on that.
Shorty, yeah, Shorty. It's funny too. It's a good thing. Like in the narration, they say that he buried her alive because
Yikes.
like when you see him come at her with a shovel and you hear him hit her twice and you think, okay, she's dead.
Right.
Then they're carrying her out of the house like she's dead. So I guess he did kill her, but then they slip in the detail that like he didn't actually kill her with the shovel though. She was still alive, and then he buried her alive. It's like wow. So yeah, the movie's full of really cool but also disturbing because a lot of it is based on reality, gruesome things like that. Sets the tone pretty early. And in the case of Shaggy, he gets shot down by the cops trying to flee with his girlfriend. And it's funny too. Like this movie has kind of what when people talk about the different sort of scales of morality. If you're talking about the scales of morality in a movie like this, it would fall under what's known as gray and black, where there's not really anybody who's like really fully good, but it's not all their fault. So it's like the most what's the word I'm looking for? The most sympathetic and moralistic characters still kind of fall into the gray, and then everything else just goes to black because then it's just full of bad guys doing bad things because they're bad. Um, but Rocket himself, he's the most sympathetic character in the movie, and he's a likable guy, and he works pretty well as a focal point. In that he's engaged in some petty crime, but for the most part, he's not interested and he doesn't want to be part of it. Although he mostly says that's just because he doesn't want to get shot more so than any sort of moral objection. But I mean, the most he does is like, yeah, he wants to like smoke pot, so he has to buy from some dealers now and again. And there's a brief part where after trying to be on the straight and narrow and working an honest job, and he gets fired for no good reason, where he tries to with a friend, they try to like embark on like lives of crime, and they just both realize they're not suited for it. It's not for them. They can't do it. Like there's like several situations where it's like, okay, we're gonna like rob these people, and it's like, no, we can't rob that guy. He's nice. It's like, oh, I can't rob that girl. She's nice. It's just like, yeah, you don't have it in you. You actually have empathy for other people, which is something that's really lacking in most of the characters. It's just some of it being their own character, and of course, a lot of the movie. The whole point of the movie is to talk about these characters are products of their environment. It's a very harsh environment. It's very difficult to do anything on the straight and narrow, to get educated and get an honest job when you're as young as like 9 or 10. Like the path to crime is right there for you, and it seems much more rewarding. They talk about like the lowest rung of the ladder is you can be a delivery boy and messenger when you're like 9 or 10, and then you move your way up. And it's like, well, why would I get an honest job if it's easier to make money this way? And so the movie's very much about that kind of cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how it's kind of set up in it's what like four different stories it focuses on, or maybe five.
Yeah, the way the movie has like one main narrative, but every once in a while it'll come into something and it will do a digression
Mm-hmm.
and go back to tell you something. Like it does that a few times. So yeah, and the movie is bookended, of course, by like it's the opening sequence, which starts. The opening sequence is near the end of the movie, really, as far as the chain of events taking place. So we have our introduction, which is actually about 15, like timeline wise, would only be about 15, 20 minutes away from the actual end of the movie. And then we jump back to the origins of some of these guys' criminal paths, and it starts with yeah, the city of God being a fairly new place in the '60s, underdeveloped and not really having any sort of established criminal structure. They were just sort of amateurs doing stuff, and the main guys there were the Tender Trio, who just would engage in holdups and robberies. But they weren't ambitious criminals. They were just sort of doing what they had to get by, and and you see that they also would like share their profits with the community in general. Like it opens with them robbing a gas truck, and while they're taking the money for themselves, they're just calling to anybody, "Hey, who wants gas? Come get gas." So I'm sure they see themselves somewhat as Robin Hood type figures, and none of them are malicious either. When they engage on the motel robbery, which was the younger Lil Dice's idea, all they wanted to do was hold people up and get the money. They didn't want to hurt anybody and certainly not kill anybody. But so yeah, that's the first digression. Then there's a digression to tell the story of the apartment that Blackie is selling his drugs out of. It just sort of talks, which is I like it because it seems somewhat realistic because it's kind of how these things go about one area sort of passing from the hands of one person to another through various events, mostly criminal. It's interesting how it starts. It was like a middle-aged woman like was living in the apartment legitimately, but she had daughters and she wanted to raise them. She probably didn't have much money, so she started selling drugs out of the apartment, and then that brought her into contact with like teenage boys that she would get involved with and do and give drugs to for various favors, sexual favors, as the movie shows. Of course, then as they get older, one of them just like muscles her out, and then the apartment changes hands a few times, and until it gets into the hands of Carrot. And when Carrot is control, who is one of the bigger dealers in the area, and when Carrot establishes control of it, he just gives it to one of his dealers, Blackie, because he feels like it has a bad, tragic history. In a way, it's right, because eventually Blackie does die, although in a more meandering way. But yeah, that's all digression right where Blackie's losing it, where Rocket has come to Blackie, I think, to buy some drugs, and then Benny and the newly anointed Little Z show up to take it. And of course, Little Z, being the psychopath that he is all set to kill Blackie right there. And Benny, being much more calm, says, "No, there's no need to kill him." He still shoots him anyway. He shoots him like in the leg or something. He says, "You'll live, but you'll work for us." And that comes back to bite him later, of course. So yeah, very much the movie's about the cycle of violence and stuff. And of course, Lil Z's our main villain. He's really interesting because he's mostly psychopathic. We see in when we finally get the flashback revealing that he was the one that murdered everyone at the motel, and he did it just sort of for fun. And Benny didn't seem to mind that he killed people, but if he thought he was going to kill somebody and it wasn't necessary, he'd tell him not to. So again, it's the black and gray morality. Benny's not violent and awful, but at the same time, he's not troubled at all at first by all the violence that a Little Z is engaging in. Like they're perfectly happy to murder other dealers to take over their territory. But then, but by the time we get up to Benny's death, I mean, we have to do full spoilers here at his going away party, where eventual Blackie accidentally kills him, when he's actually trying to kill Little Z. You see that he's not fully psychopathic because he is very disturbed and upset by his friend's death. So he is able to feel empathy for certain people, although in the movie all we see is Benny's the only one he actually ever cared about, and that's sort of really what pushes him over the edge. He doesn't have Benny to balance him out or cool him down anymore, so he just goes off the rails.
So doesn't that kind of mean he's not a psychopath?
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, even though, like, because he is capable of liking and caring about someone other than himself. In the movie, it's only one person, but still, so it makes him less of like mentally ill and more just fucking evil in a way, if you believe in that sort of thing, right? Because right at the beginning,
it shows the flashback, he's like actually like enjoying killing people.
yeah, he's getting a huge kick out of it.
Yeah.
And these are people that are tied up and helpless, and he's just shooting them like fish in a barrel, and he's like, this is awesome. And that's what really becomes his philosophy going forward, which is, hey, crime is pretty easy. You're just willing to mow down everybody in your path, and I am. And that's where he and Benny's paths sort of diverge eventually, because you find out, and at first I didn't like, it's not until you see it fully, because like, okay, so you have the part where we're going to bounce around here, of course. So while those guys are building their sort of criminal empire, Rocket is off to the side trying to keep his head down, and he has a group of friends that are basically kind of hippies that are referred to as the Groovies. And they never really talk too much about their backgrounds, but you figure most of them, unlike Rocket, seem to have probably more upstanding backgrounds. They're maybe more middle class. They're just sort of ordinary kids, and their only ties to the criminals is sometimes they buy drugs for them. So then you have the fact that has the big crush on the girl, Angelica, I think I said her name was, but she's dating the red-haired guy, Tiago. What eventually happens is she just breaks up with him, and Tiago doesn't take it well, and then he gets really into drugs until he's an addict. So now Tiago is regularly buying drugs from the dealers that are controlled by Little Z, and he comes into contact with Benny. Something about him that he likes, I guess his clothes, and they have that because he goes on the bike ride with him, and then he's like gives him a bunch of money and says, "Can you buy clothes like that? Like, you have a designer shirt, that's cool." You see that Benny, he's not getting the same things out of being like a respected hood that Little Zay is. It's more important to him for people to actually like him. And so he starts hanging out with Diego's friends and Rocket's crowd, and he realizes this is what he likes a lot more than being a criminal, and that he just genuinely wants people to like him. And he's also popular in the criminal community because he wants people to like him again. So he buys drinks and he gives away drugs and stuff. Whereas it's much different with his partner Lil Zay, who doesn't want to be liked. He wants to be respected and feared. So at first, when they were doing that little diversion thing with him going off Diego, I didn't understand what it meant. But eventually, it makes sense. You understand, like, this is what appeals to him more, and that's why he eventually decides to leave and get out. Like, he doesn't really just want to be a gangster that everybody's afraid of. He just wants to have a good time and for people to like him and to be popular. And he realizes there's a difference between being feared and liked, and he doesn't want to be feared. Where that's what it's all about for Lil Z, who was Lil Dice. We see his weird sort of transformation scene too, which isn't given much context, but obviously he goes and sees. Now Brazil is pretty Catholic now and then, but obviously Brazil being in South America, and particularly because of its black population, I'm assuming that the guy he saw was some of the old religion in there, because just like in North America, South America had in Central America and the islands and stuff, they had blacks brought over as slaves from Africa, and they brought their African religions. So I'm assuming the guy he saw was one of those guys that like stuck to the old African religions. That's what I assume it was. If somebody can give me a better thing, because remember he does like a little sort of ceremony saying like, you're not Lil Dice anymore, you're Lil Z, and he gives him the thing to wear around his neck, and he says, yeah, you're gonna rule here and stuff. He also tells him he shouldn't have sex while he's wearing it, and then he does, and eventually he does die, like the guy warns, because he says he says like, don't fornicate while you're wearing this, you'll die. And we see the scene where he rapes Knockout Ned's girlfriend, and he's wearing it. And eventually he dies. So I guess the he's not a witch doctor, but that kind of guy. I guess he was right all along. But you never see another scene with him, so I don't know. But I had to sort of piece that together myself, understanding who this guy was and what was going on. But I guess I got the feeling that, yeah, probably in parts of the city, they still have some of those old African-based religions that people hold on to, and maybe some people believe that are superstitious and believe maybe they have powers and stuff. I assume that's what he was trying to go for, right? Any edge he could get as a gangster.
Forgot what I was going to say.
But yeah, there's several digressions there. So there's the one, the original flashback talking about the 60s, and you jump ahead. Then there's the digression about the apartment. Oh God, there's at least one more. When we jump ahead from the 60s to the 70s, at first we still don't know that Lil Dice is the one that committed the murders. They only come back to that later. Like, yeah, so there's a few times so what happens is the job that the I always want to say Terrible Trio, which is some sort of comic book reference, that the Tender Trio pulled at the motel, which was a straight robbery, which was Lil Dice's idea, because they show right on. Besides the violence comes in later, but the first thing we know about him is he's ambitious. Jobs, they're not paying, but I have a big score that's going to pay, so they rip off this motel that is clearly also operating as a brothel, and they are making quite a bit of money. But the fact, even though it was his idea, since he's still just a kid compared to them, even though they give him a gun and he's all set to go in with them, they say, no, you're going to be the lookout. They say, you're still just a kid. This might have been your idea, but you're going to be the lookout. And they're saying, don't be in a rush to move up. This is important. And then they tell them, so if you do see the cops coming, shoot that window. So what happens is they pull off the job. Things seem to be going fine. Then you hear the gunshot, and he shoots the window. So they think it's the cops, and they flee. And then eventually we get a shot showing that everybody inside the motel has been shot and killed. And, of course, that's why the police have really been cracking down on them and eventually hunt them down. And it's not till later that we've moved ahead that it flashes back again twice. Once to show us that, or maybe it's part of the same flashback, but once to show us that Lil Dice committed the murders himself just because he felt like it. And as you said, got a tremendous amount of satisfaction out of it. And also there's a part where when we're following Rocket's brother, when he was sleeping with Shorty's wife, Shorty comes in and catches them, So when he jumps out the window, Shorty first goes after his own wife, but Rocket, or not Rocket, but
Goose.
but yeah, but Goose at this point is just thinking, Shorty's gonna sick the cops on me. I have to get out of here. He meets up with Rocket, and he has him, like, he's naked, and he has him give him some clothes so he can get out of there. And what happens is they say that he was never seen again, and nobody knew what happened to him. But what we see is before he gets out completely, he meets up with Benny and Little Dice, who are counting some of their money from some score they did, and he demands money from them, and he can push them around because he's older than them. And then Little Dice pretends he's going to offer him the gun. He needs the gun. He comes back, and then Little Dice shoots him down. One thing we're not told, though, is how Rocket finds that out. Like, how does Rocket know that? Because Rocket is... What's funny is the movie is told basically as narrated by Rocket, but he's almost omniscient because he knows all these other things, and we don't really know how he knows them or when he knows them. Because, okay, jumping ahead now to Rocket going to buy the drugs from Blackie at the apartment. We have the digression explaining the history of the apartment. Then we jump back up to the present, and then we have Little Zay, and they call him Little Dice. He's like, I'm not Little Dice anymore. I'm Little Zay. We flash back and find out about his origins. Now we're back once again in the moment there. There's a part where there is a gun in front of Rocket, and Lil Zay has his back to him. And in the narration, he says, "Here was my chance to avenge my brother, but I didn't take it." So that meant at that point, he already knew. And we don't know how he knew. Now, I know one thing is true about Lil Zay's character is, like, he never cared about covering up his murders. He wanted people to know he murdered people. And one of the things that's interesting, too, is, like, he's so used to murdering people. He meets Rocket about 3 or 4 different times in the movie, and every single time he forgets who he is. Like, he always has to be reminded. And at one point, like, when he's first introduced in the apartment, Benny says, he's Goose's brother. And he goes, Goose. And he goes, yeah, the late Goose. And they have a child that they killed him. Again, Benny doesn't seem at all disturbed by this. But we're told by the narration that he already knows that. But anyway, which I thought was interesting. So, I don't know. But yeah, that's another interesting sort of part of Lil Zay's character is, like, he's so free with his violence and he doesn't care that he kind of forgets that they might have consequences, like Blackie trying to shoot him, which winds up killing. Like, he only doesn't kill Blackie because Benny convinces him not to. He still shoots him in the leg anyway and says, "I'm taking everything from you." It doesn't occur to him that Blackie might seek revenge, and that's what happens. And of course, it winds up killing Benny instead of him. And it's kind of the same thing a few other times, but if we go right to the end, the way he gets killed has to do with, again, some violence he perpetrated earlier in the movie that he just didn't think would come back on him. Not only, so the Runts, we'll talk about the Runts, who are a bunch of preteen gangs members, or their own little gang that just go around robbing and stuff, and they are a problem in the City of God because by the time Lil Zay has taken over, one thing that, even though it was a lot of violence and killing to get there, once he's at the top, it's remarked that once he's there, actually the place becomes quite peaceful because he runs the place. There's no competition between people. The only other competing area was Carrot, and Carrot's sort of keeping to his area at the time. Although even early on, Lil Zay keeps talking to Benny, saying, "Oh, we should take it all. We should kill Carrot too." And Benny's always holding back, saying, "No, let Carrot handle his stuff. It's no problem. We have enough."
The problem with the Runts is they don't follow the rules of the street.
Yeah, they don't follow the rules of the street. They're going around doing holdups and stuff. And at one point, Lil Zay wants to use that as a pretense, an excuse to get rid of Carrot, because he's saying they're in your area, and you're not controlling them. You're letting them run around and stuff. So eventually, he goes after them himself. Most of them actually manage to run away. They only catch 2. And again, his cruelty is really on display here, because he makes one of them choose the other 2 that are caught who he's going to kill, and this is after already shooting both of them in the foot.
Right.
And then he makes the kid known as Steak. Steak has to kill one of them.
Yeah, what's Steak and Shake or something is his name?
Yeah, they call him Steak and Fries sometimes. Yeah.
That's a great nickname.
They have some awesome nicknames. Yeah.
That's a terrible scene. That's a hard scene to watch. Like those kids are really good actors because
they're cowering and crying.
They're probably not actors at all, but
Yeah.
They're crying.
And Steak knows he has to kill one of them, and eventually, like when he points the gun, he can't even look. He looks away while he shoots the kid. And they're like, "Oh, great, you're with us now." So at that point, he leaves the Runts and is officially part of Lil Zay's gang. And for some reason, Lil Z never understands that maybe Steak might hold some resentment towards him. It just sort of shows how out of control Lil Zay is. Little Zay, I'm not sure. Sure, some of my pronunciation is off on some of this part. I like the Portuguese pronunciation. It's great. There's a part where like just when he and Benny are first planning, like first they're stick-up artists, where they're planning, okay, now it's time to really make a move. The real power and money's in the drugs, right? We're going to take over these drug dealers. We're going to take over the operation. And they're talking about like the different drugs and stuff. They're like, oh yeah, it's like in pot and coke. And one part, Benny just goes, cocaine. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that's how everyone should say cocaine, because it sounds way cooler.
Let's do some cocaine.
Cocaine. Yeah, I think it sounds pretty cool. But yeah, so we jumped all over the place, but it's the narrative isn't as hard to follow as maybe we're making it sound. It's actually, the digressions are still pretty well done. Yeah, I don't know. I like it.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty linear with the exception of a couple of flashbacks.
Yeah.
But back to the death of Benny, I think that's probably the most tragic thing in the whole film, because, like, he's trying to get out because of the violence. Like, he just wants to go smoke pot on a farm.
Yeah.
And and by the way, the girlfriend, what's her name again?
Was it Angelica?
Yeah, Angelica. She really sleeps around, huh? She like bangs like the whole group.
I know, and yet Rocket's like in love with her, because he says the first thing, like, so when it's first introduced, she's Tiego's girlfriend, right? And he says, like, they hang around with there's several other girls in the group, but for some reason Rocket knows for a fact she's the only one that has sex.
Yeah.
He says she's the only one in the group that screws, so she knows he's at least screwing Tiego. Then after she dumps Tiego, it looks like he's gonna have his moment with her. They kiss. Yeah. Then the first appearance of the Runts show up and intimidate him and scare her off, and you can sort of understand his position, because he's just like, I can't get my ass kicked by a bunch of like 12-year-olds in front of this girl. That would be the worst thing. So I'll just give them what they want. But she's just like, I'm gonna go now, which I think is kind of shitty of her to do. But yeah, so then
and they like think he's the coolest thing in the world for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, they really. That's the one thing Rocket has going for him. They like it, and even though it winds up getting him fired, right?
Yeah.
Because when he tries to go on the straight and narrow, he works at the grocery store. He's stocking groceries. The Runts come in and they're all like, "Hey, it's that guy from the beach. What's up, yo?" And then like then his boss fires him because he thinks like he's helping them, like they're doing shoplifting and stuff, and he thinks they're helping it. So he just fires him. He's like, "What about my severance pay?" And there's no fucking severance pay. And so you understand, it's just like in that part, what is it, like the life of a sucker or something like that? He's like, what was I doing? So it really does give you a sense of just how hard it is to be in that position. Here's somebody against all trying to do the right thing, and he's still getting screwed over and treated like a criminal. It's like, I'm not a criminal. I'm honest, doing honest work, doing your shitty job, and you're going to accuse me of this and fire me, and there's nothing I can do. And the other thing, too, is there's police corruptions, right? So we'll go back to early in the movie in the 60s, where they're trying to hunt, where they are really clamping down on them after the motel robbery because, there was a massacre, too. So they really have a reason. So at one point, they just chase some guy down and just shoot him in the back. And then there's like, no, I don't think this is one of the robbers. And while he's saying that, like, one of the other guys is putting a gun in the guy's hand, like, so they can, show they had just cause for shooting this guy. I'm like, this is the way police work is mostly done in the area. It's like, a guy's running. Just shoot him in the back, and then we'll find out later. Yeah, exactly. And there's a few other times where the cops mostly are revealed to be quite corrupt. Also, when he's talking about they're in the area after Little Z takes over, he says, the cops take their bribes and they stay out of it, which works well enough. And then at the very end of the movie, when everything hits the fan and we arrest the gang leaders, they arrest, after the big shootout, and they arrest Little Z and Carrot. They actually let Lil Z go because he bribes them by giving literally all his wealth away to them. Which, of course, is photographed by Rocket. If we're going to jump to the end there, because the whole point is Rocket, from early on, his ambition was to be a photographer. It was what interested him the most, and that's what he winds up doing through a very interesting sort of path. Like those are some interesting credentials. It's like, did you go to journalism school or take a photography course? No, but I'm kind of like, I live in the area where all the gang lords are, and I'm kind of cool with them. They let me take their picture. Okay. I mean, I get it. That's how it works. That's how it works a lot in real life, you know.
Yeah.
But you can get pictures that other. It doesn't matter if you're necessarily a good photographer. If you can get the pictures that other people can't get, that's kind of the main thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I went to journalism school with several people that like they wanted to. The first 2 years of journalism are the same, but then in the third year you can kind of, at least not for everybody. I mean, where I went to school. I don't mean journalism everywhere, but anyway, the journalism course I took was a 4-year course, and the first 2 years were the same for everybody. But once you get to the third year, you could specialize, and there were several people I knew that wanted to do photos, what interested them, and I hated listening to them. But I think it's just I don't know. This is not any sort of bias against photographers or anything. But I don't know. I just got sick of listening to people talk about either being one or their ambitions to being one. I was like, yeah, I get it. You're gonna go over to Fallujah or.
Oh.
Shit. Okay, so that's my internet connection. Sorry about that. Hopefully that won't happen again. It has not been a great transition to. I don't want to speak ill of awesome StreamYard, but you guys might have noticed that we've had a lot more technical difficulties. You know, we might have talked a lot of crap about Google Hangouts, but at the end of the day, it mostly got the job done. We're having some trouble here. We've had audio issues and stuff, so thanks for your patience. I know some of these episodes aren't as smooth as we'd like them to be, and we'll continue to look for options and solutions going forward.
I think I'm still frozen.
Yeah, for me, I just have a black screen for you, but at least I can hear you, so we can keep it going. But for a second there, it said that I assume I froze or something
Yeah.
because it said I got a thing saying about my connection, which is interesting because that's again, it's not anything that's plagued me for like the last 2 years, really. So
Yeah, I guess we may explore some other options.
yeah, but getting back to how the movie was like made. As you might expect, considering the fact that it was not really, it was featuring people who weren't actually actors and was right on the streets. So there was a lot of the scenes were heavily improvised, which seemed to come up pretty well. Basically, they were told to just sort of act naturally. I'm trying to think that they did all go through sort of like a weird sort of crash course on how to act, but it was. I'm trying to remember how they did it. I read it somewhere. Yeah, okay, here it is. Beginning around 2000, this is 2 years before the movie was completed, about 100 children and young people were handpicked and placed into an actor's workshop for several months. In contrast to more traditional methods, it focused on simulating authentic street war scenes such as hold up, a scuffle, shootout, and a lot of it was improv. Yeah, okay, they're improv. So that's not, of course, unheard of in movies, but still, it's something that makes this movie a bit unique. And I think it paid off because it does lend I think it definitely has an air of authenticity to it. Also, they said something that was one of the reasons they had to do it that way was because they say so much has changed in the only 10 years since the movie, but they said there's simply, if you were casting, Brazilian actors, there were very few black Brazilian actors, and they said, well, we needed black characters to represent, realism, and there simply weren't that. There were only a handful of black actors in the whole country available, so we just really had to go outside the actor pool just so we could get black characters. So that's something I wouldn't have known until I read it. And they said but in the years since, it's become a lot more available.
Yeah, I would think this film probably helped the film industry in Brazil quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I mean, hell, I couldn't tell you. I could probably name like 4 Brazilian movies, and that's it. This is one of them.
Yeah. Same here. No, yeah, this movie I think was a huge thing for the Brazilian industry. Really put them on the map. I think it's definitely sort of their first. I think it's really Brazil's first really internationally recognized movie. Certainly, there were movies. This is 2002. There were movies for decades before that, but as far as getting like wide, like international attention, uh, this movie was at. It wasn't in competition, but it was still screened at the 2002 Cannes Festival. Let's see. It garnered the largest audience for a domestic film in 2003 in Brazil, with over 3.1 million tickets sold. The film grossed over 7.5 million in the U.S. and over 30.5 million worldwide. So yeah, that's tremendous success compared to any previous Brazilian movies. So yeah, this movie is important on several levels, not just for the story it's telling, but also just the impact it had on Brazilian film on pretty much every level. Directors, actors, producers, and it was very, very well received by a lot of critics. As usual, there's still a few. There's still a few. Here's one, and this is one of the things I thought we could get into too. Obviously, there's other stuff to talk about. Maybe we'll jump around. Is the fact that this movie was somewhat of a critical darling, specifically by audiences and reviewers and critics outside of Brazil. And I think a lot of people saw it as like a really great glimpse into a part of Rio de Janeiro's history, the gritty urban crime, which still exists to this day. But I did read a few things about some negative reviews, specifically by Brazilians, that did not really like the way it portrayed the. Here's one on Wikipedia here. Where is it? Ivana Bentes, a Brazilian film critic, criticized the film for its depiction of the favela and her view that it glorified issues of poverty and violence as means of, quote, domestication of the most radical themes of culture in Brazilian cinema as products for export. Bentes targets the film specifically in saying that City of God promotes tourism in hell. I mean, I kind of get that. I sort of know what she's saying. She's saying like the only way the world's gonna pay attention is to show like sort of like the lurid part. Here's the sexy stuff. Here's the underbelly. But we're not going to show anything good. But I mean, I don't know. It's unfair, I think, to pin that all on one movie. It's too much for one movie.
That's film in general, isn't it? I mean, you're not going to make a movie about boring things or expect it to do well. Yeah. I mean, I get that, but I don't really think it's glorifying violence.
I think it's too much to just put on one movie. I mean, and which is partially like what we just said, how this was like a really big movie for Brazil, period. But it's not fair to say this represents all of Brazil and this is everything about Brazil. It's one movie telling one story. So I think it's kind of unfair to judge it as if it has to represent absolutely everything. There are other Brazilian movies that focus on other things. And as far as glorification of violence, I don't think so. As far as I can tell, it just shows how it's very cyclical and it's very hard to get out of, and the devastating consequences. The movie has quite the body count, and I don't think there's any point in the movie where you don't feel bad for characters getting killed. I don't think it's like watching, say, Rambo mowing down people. I think it's much more real and emotional than that, It's not like a good action hero killing nameless bad guys. We see these are real people. Most of them are criminals because they feel kind of they have to be, and the ensuing tragic consequences of that. And as I said, it is a world of gray and black morality. A lot of the characters are quite bad or evil, or what we're going to call. So maybe you don't feel as bad for them, but there's plenty of decent people caught in the middle. They talk about innocents getting killed, and there's several layers of tragedy. You look at Knockout Ned, of course, he's probably the most sympathetic character besides Benny and Rocket, and you see what happens to him. He's living the life on the straight and narrow. He's an honest guy who worked his way up, probably in similar circumstances. He's a bit older than some of the characters, but you can only assume he probably lived in similar circumstances. He managed to pull himself up. He served his country in the army, and now he's got like a pretty unglamorous job, but he works hard to do it. And then yet just because a jealous gang leader is upset that he can't get laid, what does he do? He kidnaps him and the girlfriend, makes him watch him rape his girlfriend, and then attacks his house, killing his father and brother. And so, yeah, so he gets pulled into the gang war, and he specifically tells Carrot when he joins up with Carrot, I'm not a hoodlum. I'm just here for something personal between him and me. And then you see how it becomes sort of what's known as the monster or fighting monsters, how you kind of start to become sort of like them. Knockout Ned does his best not to, but at the same time, he does. The way he winds up getting killed is he kills a man basically who isn't innocent. He kills a security guard doing his job. So you see that Knockout Ned, who is a good guy with even good intentions, gets dragged down sort of into the muck by what's happened to him. But I would never consider any of it glorifying violence. I think it's very effective in showing just how devastating it is and how tragic it is. What was the other one? Here's one. Peter Rayner of New York Magazine stated, while the film was powerful, it was also rather numbing, which I don't agree with. The film whirs with energy, oddly lacking emotional heft for a work that aspires to be so epic. It is essentially a tarted up exploitation picture whose business is trying to make ghastly things fun. See, I don't see that. It just, I mean, I get it. Sometimes you can watch a movie and the emotional scenes don't work for you. They did for me in this movie, and in a way, I think if they tried to put too much out of it, they'd be making it melodramatic instead of simply. You don't always need.
It's almost.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's almost like the Brazilian critics are more harsh on this Brazilian film than they would normally be.
Mm-hmm. And again, I sort of get it, but I think it's too much to put on one film.
Sure.
It's one film telling one story that is at least loosely based on true events. At the very end, you even see the real life Knockout Ned getting that interview by the TV, which they almost do verbatim in the movie, right? Where he after he's been hospitalized after getting shot, and he's talking to the reporters about it. Yeah, when the credits roll, you get to see that actual real interview, and it's almost exactly the same. So, so again, it's a movie, it's fiction, but it's showing a lot of stuff that really did happen. Rio, I'm sure, is a wonderful city, but Rio has a history of crime and poverty that exists even today. You can't deny it.
Maybe even worse now.
I know when we hear about like cities that are dangerous to visit as tourists today, Brazilian cities are really high up, and this would have been part of it. The movie doesn't focus on that, and then again, I'm not trying to say, oh, it's bad for us tourists. No, I'm saying what I'm saying is, if it's bad for us, imagine how bad it is for the people living there, because they have to live with it and deal with it. Yeah, I'm not trying to say, oh, they specifically target us poor innocent tourists that want to exploit them. What I mean is, this is day-to-day life for a lot of these people, and the movie ends on sort of a darkly comic note when you have, after the Runts have killed Little Z, and they think, now that we have guns, we're unstoppable, right? Because Little Z, again, in his arrogance and stupidity, he arms them himself.
Yeah.
Because it never occurs to him that, they might turn on him, even though it wasn't so long ago he gleefully laughed while he forced one of them to murder one of their own. This is the sort of the delusion that a lot of criminals get when they get powerful, right? Like, nobody can touch me, I can do what I want, and et cetera, et cetera. So at the end, now these guys think they've inherited sort of the same sort of mania. Now that they're armed, they think they're unstoppable, and they're making a death list for people they want to kill to move their way up. And at one point, one of them says, "Have you heard of the Red Guard?" And they're like, "No." It's like, "Well, if they show up, we'll kill them too." The Red Guard is real, and they've existed since the late 60s to now, and they're an extremely powerful criminal organization. So it's kind of funny at one point, because a bunch of kids with guns could not in any way take them on, but at the same time, it's also tragic to think that maybe they thought they could because of just their ignorance. But yeah, the Red Guard is still alive and well today, and you don't mess with them.
I was just looking. The actress that plays Angelica, she actually has done quite a bit. So I guess that was her first acting role, and she went on to. I mean, she was in Predators. She was in Elysium.
Oh wow!
I Am Legend, Repo Man.
So I've seen her in quite a bit, and I didn't know that. Yeah. See, as far as I knew, Sue George was the one who achieved the most fame. But yeah, I mean, I get why. I mean, she doesn't have that big of a role in the movie, but she's very pretty, which,
You don't see her again after he gets shot, right? After Benny gets killed.
No.
So.
And it's kind of too bad, because you do wonder. And again, Rocket's just so darn likable, and you feel for him because he's got this crush on her. He has to watch He watches her be with Tiago. Then he loses his play for her, and then Benny takes her away. And then he's like at the party, like smiling and waving to him and Benny, her and Benny, while they're going to embark on this life. They're going to leave. And you get the feeling, again, Rocket's sort of in a weird position because he's trying his best to be a normal person and not be a criminal. And he's actually really well liked. At the party, he's up there like DJing with the headphones on. People really like Rocket. It's sort of a sad thing because he's just sort of a nice guy, but he's in this really dark and violent world. And he's just sort of doing his best to get by, which I think is something that most audiences can get behind, and I think it would probably be relatable for a lot of people that maybe lived in certain circumstances where they're like, I didn't want to be a criminal. I just wanted to live life and be a normal, good person, and this is what I had to deal with and be around all the time.
Yeah. Well, you're trying to live the straight and narrow, but you see all of your friends, reaping the benefits of the crime life. So, and
and not just the benefits, also the fact that like it's kind of dangerous in a way. You say, I don't want to be a criminal because I don't want to get shot, but in a way, sitting on the sidelines is almost more dangerous. Because at any moment, any time he's like around Lil Z, he knows Lil Z might just kill him because why not? You're not one of my guys. You're not useful to me. And when he finally is useful to him in that he takes the pictures for him, he thinks that Lil Z is definitely going to kill him once the pictures get published. He doesn't actually know that Lil Z is thrilled they got published, is really happy about it. But that's why he doesn't go back to the city, because he says, and that's why he gets to spend the night with the reporter and finally loses her virginity that he talks about, because he says to them, well, I can't go back now. Where am I going to stay? And she says, well, you can stay with me tonight. So... yeah, his expectations about losing his virginity were quite different, but I guess, it worked out.
Beggars can't be choosers.
Yeah. And he's talking to the guy. It's like, how was it? And he's like, well, I don't know, because it was my first time. But I don't know if reporters really know how to screw or something like that. But it's like he was a little bit disappointed. And again, yeah, because you don't have, because the beautiful Angelica, yeah, as you said, played by Alice Braga. Yeah. It's funny. She's my age. Wow, she's really close to my age. She's only a few days older than me.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, as you said, that was very much like a launching pad for her. So I would have, I've seen I Am Legend, I've seen Predators, I've seen The Right, which is fucking terrible.
Anthony Hopkins.
Which made me think, oh, maybe it was good. No, do not even waste your time. Yeah, and oh my God. She's in that New Mutants movie that's been in hell for development hell or whatever.
That'll probably never get released.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I actually want to see that. I'm one of the few people.
Yeah, it sounds pretty interesting. Yeah, so it's funny. She's 36 years old. Why is she playing one of the New Mutants? I mean, they're supposed to be like teens.
Right.
She's playing Cecilia Reyes, who I don't remember. Maybe she's older than the others. Oh yeah, she's called Doctor, so she must be older. I don't really remember that character. She must have come in later. But that's interesting. But yeah, I've always been so much interested in the movie because it's supposed to have a really different approach, almost kind of like a psychological horror type thing. That's what I've heard, which sounds really cool. And yeah, it's like once Disney bought Fox, they had just put the movie on the shelf because they're like, this doesn't fit with what we're doing or something like that. And they're like, well, maybe it'll get released streaming. And now Disney's just like, it's not getting released, period. But now they're saying a 2020 release. I don't know. The movie's been like finished for like a year.
Well, I know it had a lot of reshoots, so that's why a lot of people were skeptical on how good it was in the first place.
She was Isabel in Predators. So I've even seen her in the theater because I saw Predators in the theater.
Yeah, me too.
I always Elysium, it's been on my list of movies to watch, and then I've just never bothered with it. It's by a filmmaker I don't like, so I probably shouldn't bother.
Like him? Okay.
No.
You didn't like Chippy?
I didn't watch it. I never watched it.
Oh.
But I just meant of the movies that have come out. Yeah. Of the movies that he's done, I just thought Elysium kind of looked the most appealing to me. I thought, well, even though I don't like the other movies he's done, this looks pretty good. But yeah, I'm one of those people that despises District 9. God, I hate that movie.
So that's the only thing you've seen him do, right? The only.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is how it was. He did District 9, which I hated. Chappie didn't. I thought of the three, Elysium looked maybe like the most tolerable. I don't know. Anyway, it's not really a big deal.
It's I mean, Elysium on paper is a really good movie, but I just don't think it translates
Yeah.
into
I
an
mean, I'm a
entertaining
Matt
film.
Damon fan. I mostly like him.
He's fine in it, but it just I
Yeah.
don't know. I saw it in the theater and I haven't seen it since, and probably won't watch it again.
Uh,
I think Jodie
oh, she's in
Foster's in
Blind.
there too.
Oh, she doesn't have a role really. She's called Woman with Dark Glasses, but she's in the movie Blindness, which I thought was an interesting movie. Remember that movie?
I saw
Which it actually has sort of not a Brazilian thing, but it's actually written by the book was written by a Portuguese author. Or it's that movie where just like everybody suddenly goes blind,
Yeah, I saw it.
basically. Oh, okay.
It was good. I liked it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's one of those movies that's really that's sort of depressing because it's like, look how bad, like terrible human nature is. It's like you can always count on us to sink lower in a bad
Totally.
situation and make it worse. Yeah,
It's in 3 days we're all feral again.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
ridiculous.
exactly.
Like we're
But anyway, it's interesting. I wouldn't have known if you hadn't pointed out. So yeah, so this movie was a springboard for her career, absolutely. But as you said, her character is like she's not unlikable, but in a way, it sort of makes sense because it so much reminds me of myself when I was young, like focusing on like, kind of the wrong girl or something. Kind of like where Rocket was. He's like, oh, she was so great and pretty, and then she proceeded to date everybody but me, and then disappeared.
yeah, that was his chance. The next
Hmm.
day, cry on my shoulder.
Yeah, and she seemed to be going, like you said, she seemed a bit slutty because she was already kissing him. She's like, all right, on to the next one. But then she meets Benny, and you never really get a sense of why she likes Benny, except the fact is that just like Rocket, as I said, is really likable and he's popular. Benny even more so. Benny, and that's what Benny, as we talked about before, that's what Benny really liked. And he realized a lot of it came from being a criminal, and I think he wanted to be liked for genuine reasons. He wanted people to like him, not just because he was Lil Zay's right hand man or that he could give them drugs or whatever. He wanted people to like him for him, and I think that's really the main reason why he wanted to get out. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's tragic that he winds up getting inadvertently killed by Blackie.
like he says, I'm out. I'm done. I'm
Yeah,
leaving, and then gets killed.
yeah,
But yeah, you can tell when they're at the party with she's with Rocket at that point, and then
yeah. That's right. Rocket actually takes her to the party, so he didn't. So yeah, that's right. I forgot. I'm glad you pointed
Benny,
that out because yeah, he didn't wholly lose her on the beach. Like the beach was a setback,
right,
but he was taking her to the party.
and then
Maybe
Benny
just as
breaks up
friends.
a
I don't
fight between Little Z and the other drug dealer guy,
know. Was it Carrot?
Carrot. Yeah,
Yeah, and this is
that's when they're
after Lil
arguing.
Lil Z has already made the spectacle, right? Like Lil Z was realizing as much as he could boss people around and scare them, like girls didn't like him because he asked the girl to dance and she's with some
Yeah,
other guy. So he goes, finds the guy on the dance floor, and at gunpoint makes him strip. You see, Lil Z is he's totally losing it because he's found one thing he can't control, and it's pointed out later when he goes after Knockout Ned's girlfriend. It's said in narrations, like for all his power and stuff, the only way he could get girls was by force or paying them,
well,
and
he's a
that did
very
bother him.
very insecure guy.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, his main solution to everything is just kill somebody.
yeah,
Somebody. That's why you have to really give Carrot credit. Carrot really had balls
he
because
did.
at
Yeah,
this point, at the party, at this point, Lil Z has killed everybody else except Carrot, and now he's going to Carrot and he's saying he's whining to him about the runts and stuff
yeah.
like that. And he's just like, fuck off. He's like, I'll deal with my part, you deal with yours. And at one point, like when Benny comes to I can't think of words tonight. Distill? No, to fix the situation or
Yeah.
whatever. He says like, you better change your baby's diapers or something like that. I'm like, I can't believe you're saying that to like Lil Zay's face. Like he should
I thought the
pop you
same
right
thing.
there.
Yeah,
It's like, so yeah.
and
So Carrot really had balls.
he's killed people for a lot less than that.
Hmm.
So
And then what's interesting too is like Carrot doesn't even try to leverage killing Blackie into getting any sort of sympathy. Because okay, in the aftermath of that, Blackie flees to Carrot because he knows Carrot's the only guy that can protect him. And he says, I fucked up bad. And he tells him what happened. And then he just said, you just killed like the most likable guy here and Lil Zay's best friend. And he just kills him on his doorstep. right? Now you think maybe he could have leveraged that into good graces with Lil Z. He could have said, "Hey, I killed the fucker that killed Benny," but he realizes maybe there's no point because even if I think he realizes there's no point because even if that appeased him for a little while, there'd still be conflict anyway. So he just thought, okay, now it's just war. We're going to do it. So yeah, I kind of respect his character in a way. On the sliding scale of morals, once again, gray and black. He is a hoodlum.
He knew the one guy that diffused the situation is dead now. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing stopping Z from killing him now,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
So turning him black, he wouldn't do any good anyway.
No. Even if it did, it would have been temporary at best. It might have appeased him for a little while, but then there would have been some excuse. So he's just like, okay, it's on now. And it's the same sort of thing. Like, was the part where after Ned has like shot some of his guys, remember he sends, at this point, Steak is now a messenger boy. He's been up-jumped. Steak is now a messenger guy in Lil Z's organization. He comes to Carrot to give him the message. He says, hey, if you just kill Knockout Ned, this can end. Lil Z will back off. And he's like, tell him to go fuck himself, pretty much. Like, Knockout Ned's with us. And he's probably right, again, because you get the feeling like even if he did kill Knockout Ned and say, here's his body, I killed him, Lil Z would just turn on him anyway. Because he's that kind of guy. And he also realized that Knockout Ned is a valuable weapon that he can use. Because here's a guy that's not just some cheap hoodlum that you throw a gun in his hand. This is a guy with military training who actually was a gifted marksman. And as they said, it really gives him the edge when they're having these gun battles in the streets. Because that's the other interesting thing about the movie. The movie talks about violence and stuff, but it also shows just how many guns are just all over the streets, right? Guns are plentiful and very easy to get. And they're all just put into the hands of people that don't know to use them or anything. And it's just chaos. I mean, you don't want guns to be in the hands of even well-trained criminals, really, because you don't want criminals having guns, of course. But now you've got him just handing them out. And as they said, when the war starts, it goes back and forth between people signing up to either join Carrot's side or his side. And they're just like, here's a gun. Here's a gun. Yeah. Hey, random person off the street that said a few words to me. Here's a gun. And, of course, it winds up biting him in the end, not just by both of them, actually, in that Carrot arms the kid that actually winds up killing Knockout Ned, because he doesn't realize who he is, even though he says, I want to get the guy that killed my father, not realizing that Ned was the guy that killed his father, the security guard.
Omar or something like that? What's his name?
Yeah, I can't remember. Something like that.
That was Otto. Really cool.
Otto. Yeah, and if you do watch the original scene where he shoots it down, it is that kid. Yeah. Where he like you see him with the blue shirt like over him when he falls down. He's like bent over him. And the movie's right for knowing that we've seen so many faces. It's hard to keep track of them. So the movie's pretty spot on. The movie's gambles. You might say, oh, but we already saw him, even though it was really quick. But no, yeah, it knows we're not going to remember that it was the same kid. And he's also the kid that shot him from a distance, that injured him, that sent him to the hospital. Right. But yeah, Otto was his name.
Well, we didn't know that was his dad,
No. Would we? So like I said, so both of them were arming people that were actually hurting them, and of course, in the case of Lil Z, towards the end, he armed the runts, who were the ones that eventually shot him down. And again, it's kind of stupid on his part because he knows that he's terrorized and brutalized the runts, and he knows, and you think he'd know what they're capable of, and now he's just giving them all guns. And that's all right before the chicken thing. There's no point. This isn't important, but I really like how the chicken thing is done in the opening because. Okay, so the movie opens with that scene. Right after that scene, we don't know what's happened. All we know is that we're on the street, and there's some chickens around, and meat is getting cut up and stuff. And then one of the chickens escapes, and then they chase it through the streets, etc. But I love how it's shot because it's shot to make it seem like the chicken knows exactly what the situation is and what the stakes are. Because the way they cut the camera, they show like chickens and they show meat and they show like cleavers cutting, then it'll cut really fast to the chicken sort of looking concerned. It's really great. It really makes it seem like the chicken is like the wheels in the chicken's head are turning like, oh fuck, I'm next. And then he like bites his way out of his thing and runs off. I thought that was really cleverly done because they didn't just make it like, okay, the chicken escapes. It's cut in such a way that it really looks like the chicken is fully understanding what its predicament is and is like, I have to get out of here. I thought that was clever how they did this. Pretty funny. The chicken does get away, people. In case anybody's wondering, the chicken gets away.
Yeah, that was another time when it was kind of almost getting run over by a police car.
Yeah. I don't know how they shot that, but the chicken managed to get away.
Yeah, shot out the side or something. I was like, oh,
They were just sort of relying on the fact the chicken knows to run. It knows to run. We won't run it over.
he'll
And it
move.
got
He'll
away.
move. He'll
He'll
move.
move. He'll move. Speaking of which, I just read something. It's funny. I wound up reading it in two different places today. So I was reading a list on. First, I was reading a list on Cracked about, I don't know, bad stuff that happened at movies, and then also on MSN there was a list of, I'm not even making up the number, 36 of Disney's biggest controversies, because when you're Disney, you've been around for a long. So one of them was the same thing, and it was about a movie. You know how in like the 50s and 60s Disney made a series of movies, like they were like nature documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they made one called like White Wilderness or something in 1958, and it's the scene and there's a scene in it with lemmings, and it's most responsible for the myth that lemmings kill themselves, because what it was they actually bought lemmings from like local Inuits and then just sort of like staged it and threw them off a cliff to make it look like they killed themselves.
I was just talking to someone about that the other day.
Yeah, so that's mentioned on Cracked and on an MSN list, and it's interesting too to note that it wasn't until 1983 that somebody working for CBC of all things found out about it being staged. But yeah. But to this day, that's like the main reason why people think like there's that myth that people think lemmings did it, because Disney showed like what they thought was a true documentary of them really doing it in the wild when they were just actually killing them, which is pretty fucking terrible.
Like they don't actually like commit suicide. Like they don't.
No, they don't run off cliffs to their death. But yeah, they stage. I don't even know who got the idea. Like,
hey, let's make it seem like they do this.
It's like, we're doing this cool documentary about animals in the north, but now we're at lemmings. Lemmings are boring. They don't do anything. Let's make something up. I know, they're all wildly suicidal.
But when you say lemmings, that's the first thing you think of, right? Is they run off cliffs.
Somebody that will, or if it's a person, somebody will mindlessly follow,
right.
Even to get themselves harmed, But exactly. But yeah, I read two separate articles about that today, which is pretty funny.
That's funny. Yeah, I was just talking to a friend of mine about how like humans are like the only animal capable of knowing their own existence, and they commit suicide. And then we were talking about how that lemmings thing is not even true.
Mm-hmm.
It's so crazy.
Speaking of another thing now that it reminds me of is, I think this was another list actually of something. There's like, I think it's in somewhere in Britain. There's like a bridge, like an old sort of stone bridge. It's quite high up, and it's a place that is notorious for dogs jumping off and killing themselves. There's like a whole bunch of incidents of dogs jumping off that bridge to their death. And again, dogs, as far as scientists know, have no capacity for suicide. That those dogs, there's something else that was making them jump off. Like they weren't thinking, this is a good place to kill myself. There was something, and nobody's figured out something about this bridge where dogs would jump off it. And it was really high.
Magnetic force or some sort of...
Maybe. I don't know.
It's... Well, they say dogs have a sixth sense or whatever. They have ability to sense things. So maybe it's some sort of some sort of wave.
Yeah. Before the hurricane here, animals definitely sensed it. I can tell you that. They knew. I could tell. I was walking around the day of, and all the birds had already disappeared. But I actually did walk around a bit right during the beginning of the storm, just because I wanted to go around the block. It was very foolish. I actually cut it short because I was like, some piece of flying debris is going to smash me in the face, and I'm going to die. I have to get in. But it was still interesting to experience winds that hard. The rain was hitting me like bullets. But yeah, that hurricane, if people don't know, Hurricane Dorian, that devastated the Bahamas. It smashed into us on Saturday afternoon, which is weird. If you know where I live in Nova Scotia. This is not a part of the world that gets hurricanes. What usually happens is hurricanes come up the coast. By the time they reach us, they're not hurricanes anymore. They're maybe tropical storms. But this is the second time in my life. Back in 2003, there was one called Hurricane Juan, which was much more destructive. And it was as destructive as almost anywhere else. But here we lost power for 2 days, trees and lines down all over the city. And probably the most interesting thing is a big construction crane crashed into an apartment building. But as far as I know, no fatalities or anything like that. I think Juan in Halifax killed 3 people, which is pretty crazy because, again, hurricanes were not something that happened in this part of the world. So,
considering the destruction, that's really not bad.
Mm-hmm. But as far as I know, no fatalities this time.
That's good.
And I wouldn't be surprised because, like I said, as far as like power and devastation goes, this would maybe be half of what Juan was. Juan was, I had no frame of reference for it. I didn't believe them when they said it was coming. I didn't believe it. Like when I actually went outside and saw what it had done, I couldn't believe it because I was like, this doesn't happen here. This happens in other parts of the world. Like to see what happened. So this time I was more prepared for it.
Yeah.
But it's still crazy, and I feel bad because some trees that I like are down now. Some very old trees, which is too bad. I haven't seen the public gardens yet; it's been closed off. But obviously, some more stuff probably came down in there, which is too bad. I remember one. Yeah, there's the whole what section? South. I guess southwest. The southwest corner. The public gardens is basically a sort of a big square. The southwest corner used to be really thick with trees. And if you were on like the far side and the trees are here, you couldn't see through them. But after Juan, you can see right through. So because of how many trees got lost at the time. But this time, it definitely wasn't as bad. But anyway, just a little digression there about current events. There were a couple. There's at least one or two things in the movie where I kind of had to guess. It wasn't exactly spelled out. Not exactly what happened, but why they happened. Okay, so at one point during the gang war escalating, there's a weapons dealer that has dealt with both parties, first with Carrot and then with Lil Z, and Lil Z eventually just rips them off, right? He says, "Get out. We're not paying. We're just gonna take all the weapons and the money." And the guy goes, and the narration talks about, of course, if you're a weapons dealer, you have a supplier, and those people don't fuck around. So was his supplier the police in general? Is that what it meant? Because he met with a cop. He met with a cop, and then the cop just kills him, right? I guess for screwing up. So does that mean was it like one rogue cop who was like giving him access to the police's weapons, or was this cop just some sort of facilitator between like another supplier altogether? Like it's never made clear, and I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it doesn't elaborate on it.
Yeah, so I couldn't tell. I was like, does this mean like the weapons they're getting are directly from the cops? Or does this just mean this is one cop that has access to weapons from somewhere else, like military or something? I don't know. It's not important really to the plot, but I thought maybe in the second time I watched it, I would see something that I didn't see before, but I still didn't. So it's not really made clear exactly where the weapons were coming from, if the cops were the source, or if they were a go-between, or why even the cop decides to kill the dealer. I guess just because he fucked up, because he failed. He'll go, again, what else could he have done? He's in a room full of armed hoodlums that will murder anybody. And they say, we're taking the guns now and you're leaving. What was he supposed to do? Fight his way out? But anyway. Again, I guess it's partly just show just the harshness. Anybody can kill anybody.
Yeah, I mean, how easy would it be for them to just put the guns back on the street? They confiscate weapons and then just go right back out on the street. Someone takes them.
Yeah, and I'm sure that happens all sorts of places in real life, right?
Yeah. Drugs, guns. You would think it happens a lot.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Because it would be easy to do. Especially back then, like before they probably had any kind of system.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting that we're getting a movie that's set basically in Rio de Janeiro, but it never pulls back to like more of the city. It really just stays in the city of God. So you never really see the bigger, more glamorous side of Rio, which I know is on purpose. But in part of me kind of would have liked to have seen them pull back and show some of the other city. But I guess they're just trying to say how self-contained this world is, how it's really cut off. Like even before the gang war, it was really sort of cut off. And then during the gang war, it was like a war zone. As they said, it was divided in half basically between Carrot and Lil Z's thing. And they said, it was almost like having military checkpoints. Like people in the neighborhood couldn't cross from one section to another, not even to see relatives, because they were just locking everything down.
Yeah, I guess the one contrast to the rest of the film would be when they do go to the beach.
Yeah, which is something that
Rio's.
Yeah, something that makes people like
Rio's like a real. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just because it makes people like living in this part of the world sort of jealous in a way, right? Because it's proof. Like if you live in the worst like poverty and slums ever, you still have access to some of the best beaches in the world.
Right.
But
it doesn't show that though, which I think is intentional. It just shows you the darkness of the underbelly.
Sure. Yeah.
Pretty much.
As I said, I think it's pretty important to focus and keep it sort of self-contained and away from sort of the brighter lights of Rio. It's interesting when they talk about some of the groups too. Like when Benny has his party, he says like how Benny was so popular, he got all the groups. It was some interesting groups. So you had the gangsters, you had and their dealers and stuff. Then you had the hippie group that Rocket's friends with called the Groovies. But then he talks about like the soul people. Then there was like some other sort of like dancing people too. I can't remember if it was samba. It might have been samba. I was like, there's a
Samba,
whole
yeah.
samba crowd. And then he's like the religious people. I'm like, what
Benny was
is
cool
this?
with all of them, right?
Yeah, Benny was cool with all of them. At one point, he's telling the religious people, "I'm going to go to church someday," or something, something weird like that.
It's almost like Lil Z was like jealous, but
Oh, I think
also
so.
like that's like the one person that he actually like cared for.
Hmm.
So
I mean,
I almost felt like when I first watched it that when he said I'm leaving, I felt like Lil Z was going to kill him because
hmm
it was like you're not going to leave me. You know.
yeah, and that's where like you get a sort of a bit of a surprise about Lil Z is like when Benny dies, he is really genuinely upset about it, and you
Yeah.
get the idea that no, he never would have killed Benny. Like
Yeah.
nobody else in the world mattered to him, and nobody could talk to him the way Benny could, but he really did care about Benny. And like you said, we see how their paths diverge. How Benny gets more interested in just hanging out with the Groovies and having a good time, and just sort of wearing cool clothes and people liking him. Whereas with Lil Zay, it was just all about fear and respect. He just wanted, but then he realized how kind of empty that was in a way because he was striking out with women, which made things a whole lot worse. And then, of course, Benny dies, and now he doesn't have anybody to keep him in check. And next thing you know, you got a gang war.
Right, because Benny probably would have tried to curb that if he would have been alive.
Oh, I think so.
Well, as he
Because
has been the whole time.
yeah. Benny was the buffer because he always had a pre-existing relationship with Carrot. They never really expand on that because the fact is he and Lil Zay grew up together. They were friends back when he was Little Dice. So it's never actually explained how Benny at some point sort of got in good with Carrot, but I guess it doesn't really matter.
Well, when he's trying to retire, he actually mentions Carrot, and Lil Z says, "Oh, he's a motherfucker." He said,
Yeah,
"Everybody's a motherfucker to you,
yeah,
or
and he's
whatever."
right. Like and he's right. You get to a point where people like you just aren't fun to be around, and you see it in different movies too. Like I don't know, something like Scarface, right?
Yeah,
Like that guy just becomes so power mad and paranoid that like he's got sort of everything, but at the same time he doesn't have much because nobody actually likes him. They're just all fucking terrified of him, and it's kind of the same thing. What happens with Lil Z?
yeah, yeah, totally. And the cocaine probably doesn't help
I
with the
assume, yeah,
paranoia.
yeah. Damn, it feels good to be a gangster. But as you said, it does make me sort of think about how I've seen like almost no Brazilian films, so it's something else I should probably follow up on.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend City of Men as well.
Yeah, and obviously that's sort of the logical thing to follow this up with because I've always been curious. Like as soon as it came out in 2007, I was like, oh yeah, I should see that, and I was genuinely curious about it. And then I don't know, got put on the back burner. So it's something I definitely would like to seek out in the next little while, not for the show, but just for my own
Yeah.
uh, satisfaction.
It's almost one of those, the original was so good, why
Yeah, it's
bother?
hard to live
Yeah.
up to it, but still kind of interested to see. Um, yeah, I'm just looking at Fernando Marias again to see what kind of other stuff he's done. Oh, I'm an idiot. He was the one that directed Blindness.
Oh,
That makes
really?
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that partially explains why that girl was in it too, but also because yeah. So yeah, he directed Blindness. That's funny. He's got an upcoming movie named Nemesis. A movie in 2019 called The Two Popes. biographical comedy drama. It's supposed to come out in November and should hit Netflix in December. Huh. Anthony Hopkins is in it as Pope Benedict XVI. And Jonathan Pryce is the other Pope. Oh my God, this sounds really good. Yeah, that's going to be on Netflix on December 20th. That sounds interesting. That's not really a Brazilian movie, I guess, but it's a movie by a Brazilian director.
I'm just looking up like popular British films, and the both of the Elite Squad films I was telling you about are on there.
Okay. Yeah, and anyone watching, if you want to recommend any Brazilian films, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I'm not really very familiar with those four are like the only ones I've seen. I think.
Yeah.
But they're all good. Thank you very much, Xenu. We appreciate it.
One of my favorite movies in the world is called Brazil, but it has nothing to do with Brazil. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Hey, Xenu's Apprentice. Got a list of Brazilian films, but I wanted something that was more about the industry itself and some of the history. Part of me thinks maybe I should have done some of that research before this show. Oh, well, it's okay. Brazilian films of the 90s. Yeah, right now I'm finding his list, but I just wanted something that was about the industry in general, sort of the history of Brazilian film, because I don't know that much. Brazil.
Yeah, that's just I'm coming across list as well.
Hmm. Okay, here we go. Cinema. Cinema of okay, here we go. There is an article called Cinema of Brazil, so I'll have to look into that after the show. Early in the 20th century, took some time to come out. Ah, Cinema Novo. I've heard of that. Okay, so Cinema Novo was kind of like Brazil's sort of answer to what was going on, some of the other movements that happened in the 60s. Kind of like the French New Wave or the Italian Neorealism. So that sounds interesting. Yeah, that seems like something to get into in the future. Because as we said, we're always
Yeah.
trying to expand our horizons and stuff. I've seen a couple Chilean films as far as South America goes. One was part of like a film course that I took. It wasn't bad. It was kind of like a surreal type of movie.
No, that was Mexican. I'm trying to think. I don't know that I've seen any. Um, do you recognize this Avatar?
I do. I do recognize it, but I can't.
I do too. I'm trying to find
Shit.
what it
I
is.
know I've seen that. Man, that's going to bother me. Because I absolutely do recognize that. How about a hint? Just a hint, because I'm sure I know that.
I think we may have covered it on this show.
Okay, here's a film from '95 that had an Academy Award nomination. I'm looking at Oh, I've heard of Central Station. Okay, I've heard of Central Station. That's a Brazilian film from '98 that was fairly well acclaimed. I'm just looking at some of these other titles. It's funny, if a couple of these I'm looking at are considered, they're not fully Brazilian. They're considered joint Brazilian-French productions. I didn't know there'd be that much crossover. Well, maybe there isn't. Maybe that's just a coincidence. But yeah, I'm gonna have to read this Cinema of Brazil article later because it's kind of piqued my interest. Is it a touch of Zen? Touch of Zen is my guess. City of God.
Yep, you got it.
Ah, yeah. That's a beautiful movie. It's a bit long, but it's definitely worth the watch.
I don't believe I've seen it, but I do recognize that picture. Maybe just from the Avatar I've seen before.
Yeah, it's a one of the more sort of, if you're going to talk about like sort of important sort of kung fu movies, even though most of the fighting is actually sword fighting rather than hand to hand. But it's definitely a good example of a fairly early complicated fight choreography, because I think it's fairly early 70s. It's like 71 or something like that. And yeah, it has some fairly complex fight choreography, because sometimes you'll have like a lot of characters on the screen all sort of engaging, and it's not just sort of hacking and slashing. Some of it's very detailed. But yeah, I haven't seen it a few years, but it's yeah, it's definitely a big pillar one. Yeah, okay, yes, wuxia.
Get technical
Come on,
now.
it's the same ballpark. Give me a break. Same ballpark. Wushu. I'm trying to think of any other elements here with City of God. I know we sort of jumped from topic to topic. I'm trying to think of any of the other characters that were interesting. The movie does a pretty good job of introducing a lot of characters and focusing on the important ones. But even some of the ones that are lesser that drift in and out, they can come back later and be important. In the case of somebody like Steak and Fries, Shake and Steak,
Yeah,
those names.
steak and
So
shake.
that's something I kind of like about the movie too. Is like sometimes a character will seem fairly minor, but then they'll show up later and they'll be more important. So it's a pretty good movie if you're paying attention, or doing your best anyway to pay attention to keep track, because it is a lot of characters to keep track of. Like I said back at like near the beginning, I think having them all have all these nicknames helps a lot. If they all had sort of just proper names to go by, I think I would be mixing them up a lot more. And plus, it's really true to life too. When you've got criminals, they almost always use nicknames. Pretty much, it's just part of the lifestyle.
Yeah,
I
why
don't know.
is
When I
that?
grew up, uh, I can't really say where it started. Some of it, I'm sure, has to do with just having a certain amount of notoriety. Maybe
So,
some of it is just sort of trying to distance themselves from who they really are. I don't know. Like I'm John at home, but on the streets I'm Snake. I don't know.
yeah.
Some of that macho stuff. That's what I've made this argument before about like comic book stuff too. Like, because sometimes people will talk about like whether it's a comic book movie or a show or something with maybe superheroes or supervillains, talking about how maybe it's sort of silly if it's supposed to be like real world that they're using these sorts of names. And I'm thinking you absolutely would, though. Like, we already live in a world where criminals use nicknames and stuff like that. And if you're in the case of somebody, let's say somebody starts running around on rooftops as a vigilante, we don't know his name. So if a nickname comes up, people are going to use it. You can't say, "Well, I refuse to use that silly comic booky name." Well, okay, well, we can't. What are you going to call him? You don't know who he is. And I think it's kind of a similar thing with like in real life with criminals,
Maybe it's a
because criminals,
way.
yeah, they like.
I was saying maybe it's a way of maybe they're not knowing the actual person, like with the the police. Because I know like
Uh,
I've
yeah, a
seen
certain amount of deniability too, right? You get a
yeah
perp in, you're like, who are your friends? It's like, I don't know any of their real names.
yeah
Yeah,
yeah
I
it's
just,
like that.
I just,
I've seen that show, The First 48, a few times, and they're like, okay, who did you see on this night or whatever? And they're like, Blood.
yeah.
Well, what's the name? Blood. There's
It's like, I
like
don't know his
50
name.
aliases. The guy
Yeah.
called Blood, or whatever.
hmm Yeah.
Or
Aliases are definitely an important part of being a criminal. Street cred, deniability, being able to like start over in different places, I guess. So yeah, when I grew up, everybody had nicknames. I didn't really have a nickname. Just people loved my last name, so they always called me that, which I got really sick of. I was really happy when I got to university where people didn't necessarily know my last name and they just started calling me by my first name again, which was kind of freeing.
oh man, that
But
was always a jock thing.
yeah,
Calling people by their last name. I hated that shit.
yeah. But I mean, as I said, I have a last name that people really enjoy because
Mm-hmm.
it's unique and it's short.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. For instance, I live in Halifax now, and I mean the population of like the main city is like somewhere around 650,000, like that. Like I'm the only person in the entire city with this last name. Nobody else has it.
Really? Wow.
You can go through the phone book. It's not there. Yeah, the only people with my last name east of Ontario are my family and my father's half brother's family. That's it. It's a Ukrainian name. But yeah, people have always really enjoyed it because it's short and simple and I don't know, different, I guess. And it's fine, but yeah, it was something I kind of couldn't get away from. But yeah, a lot of the people I hung out with, like not directly, but like friends of friends, a lot of them, especially because they were jockish, they all had nicknames. For instance, there was this group of guys, they're all about not much older. You think of them as older, but they would only be like 1 year and maybe 2 years older than me. They all had nicknames based on Cape Breton Oilers, which was the AHL team that was here from 1988 to 1996, the Edmonton Oilers farm team. So they all gave themselves nicknames based on various Oilers, which I thought was kind of cool actually, because I love the Oilers anyway. I was a big Oilers fan, so they'd have names like that based on that. That's why you'd have like I don't know, like what was like one of our friends. His name was Jeremiah, but I think I'm trying to remember which one. He might have been Floyd, which just sounds so funny. It's like what? And you always have to explain to people. It's like, why do you call Jeremiah Floyd? Oh well, it's an Oilers thing, stuff like that. Plus, but what's weird is of that group, a guy that I was friends. Again, I wasn't friends with him, but I knew him. His name was Mark Richardson. And he was not like, and it's funny too because he wasn't like one of those guys in the group who was like lower down or got picked on or anything. He was well liked and well respected, and he was a big guy and he was good at hockey. And his nickname was Bitch, and he was fine with it, which I always thought was really weird because you think Bitch is like a real put down and stuff, but he just was fine with it for whatever reason. So I don't know. So yeah, a lot of the guys who grew up, they had nicknames. Like Ryan, it was funny because Ryan never really had a nickname, so we made up a nickname that was kind of like a fake nickname, but sometimes we called him Squire just because to point out that he didn't have a nickname. So think about that. There's ironic nicknames, and then there's whatever the hell that is. It's like you never had a nickname, so we'll just randomly give you one that we'll use every once in a while to remind you that you don't have a nickname. Like that's how many layers this situation has.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever really had one. I mean, mostly like Jay, like Jay the Stingray, but like only my family and my childhood friends call me Jay. Everyone else calls me
Mm-hmm.
Jason. So
Jason, yeah,
that's kind of
I like all you Jay because it's
yeah,
your YouTube
right,
persona.
right.
Yeah, but and that's another thing. Like as much as I didn't really grow up with it for myself, the internet's always been a big deal to me to have like a sort of a separate identity
Mm-hmm.
from. I've danced around my last name. I'm not saying it, not because I'm really worried about anything, but whatever. But
What
so
was your
Cold Dark
first
has
like
always
screen name?
something really Strider.
Uh, I
I
used
was
to go by.
Strider and Ryan was Hitchhiker. We used to go in chat rooms and fuck people up.
Oh man, that was so
90,
much fun.
90s chat rooms.
Go on like Christian chats and just say like faggot a whole bunch or something.
What's funny is I remember even as late as my second year in university, this would be about 2002, 2003. I remember my roommate, my friend, and I, we used to go in Christian chats and we'd say, okay, it's too easy to freak these people out, obviously, right? So we'd say, okay, just be yourself and see how long
Yeah,
you last. Like, don't try
that's a
to
good.
offend
Yeah.
anybody. And we still would like get kicked out like within like 15 minutes. Like, like one person kicked me out because I mentioned like a book that like had a sex scene in it or something.
Oh God.
I didn't bring up the scene. They knew the book and said like, well, we don't really talk about that here. And I was like, I wasn't going to talk about that scene. And they kicked me. Like, stupid people.
We don't.
But
We
yeah, I
don't.
remember like, so yeah, the evolution of some of my names. Like my first name was Strider. Ryan's was Hitchhiker. Ryan eventually became Surfcaster, which is based on like guitars. Um, what did I upgrade to after Strider? I don't know. I've done Silver Creature for a while. That was one of my nicknames. That's just basically putting two albums together. My favorite band was Moist. Their first album was Silver. Their second album was Creature, so I'd call it just Silver Creature. Remember somebody else had it, so I had to be Silver Creature 11 somewhere, which really bothered me.
Uh, I went by Mad Hatter for quite a while.
Nice.
Um, it's really the only main one I remember before Jay the Stingray. I've been Jay the Stingray for quite a while, like
Yeah.
2005.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And my pen name, Cold Dark, has been around since I was about 21. And what's funny is like my sister actually inadvertently improved it because at first I wanted to be like, dark. So, but originally it was Cole, then it was the initial D and then the word arc, like Cole D arc, which is kind of clunky. And I remember at one point I was having a conversation with my sister and she said, "Are you still calling yourself Cold Dark?" I was like, "Dark, this is so much fucking better." So yeah, so of Arc, like Joan of Arc. So I really like that. I don't remember if Fizel was joking or not, or if he really thought that was my real last name, because I remember at one point introducing me on the show on the Sausage Factory, he referred to me as a French Canadian. I'm like, I'm not a French Canadian.
Yeah, I think I thought that was your last name for a while.
Yeah. No, it's a cool name, but it's fiction.
Yeah. Old chat room days. I miss those. Life was
Yeah.
simpler back then.
In some ways, even though it was slower and more primitive, the internet was a lot better. Because, for one thing, like, nowadays, like, everything you have to register for and pay for and stuff. Back then, you didn't. I wish I was. Maybe someday, Kenny. I do some volunteer teaching, but that's about it. The downtown library.
Yeah, it's. I kind of wish I spoke Portuguese, or could at least understand Portuguese, because I'm not sure. The translation was definitely different the first time I saw it.
I think so for me too.
And
I
they
think
use
there
some
were a few.
slang, which like I know at one point he says like nada, and then the translation is zilch or something like that. Like I mean that's a
Yeah.
odd choice of words.
Well, I mean, they do both mean the same thing. It's hard when you're translating slang too, because it's slang's always changing, right? Because there's slang that you and I use right now, and then there's slang we used to use when you were younger, but we wouldn't use now because it seems clunky and out of date. But that doesn't all move at the same pace with the same languages, right? So, yeah, if you're thinking nobody would say zilch now, maybe that's like what people really do say for another language, like their equivalent of it. It's very interesting. It's fascinating how stuff like that goes. Because yeah, no, everything doesn't proceed at the same pace or level. So, and then there's just some direct
Yeah,
translations that just don't work at all.
yeah. I know a lot of that we wouldn't understand what they're talking about because it is a lot of slang involved.
Yeah,
Like you were saying, the one guy's translates to chicken or something like that.
yeah,
Knockout, Ned.
Yeah, Knockout. His name would have actually been like Chicken Guy or something, which sounds ridiculous to us, but they actually means like smooth ladies man of all things. Whereas for us, chicken would be like an insult. So yeah, they have that list on the Wikipedia page where they show the original name in Portuguese, the direct translation, and then what it was changed to if it was changed. Yeah, but I thought that was probably the most interesting one. And in the case of, like we said, some of them are close enough. Like our main character translates to Firecracker, but again, Firecracker doesn't really work. But Rocket, yeah, that's a name. That's a cool name, you know. But words are different in different languages.
When I think of Rocket, I think of the Planet of the Apes movies.
Huh.
One of the it's not Caesar, but one of the other higher ups. Their son's name was Rocket.
Yeah, that's right. I guess nowadays I think of Rocket Raccoon, of course,
Yeah.
a Marvel character who's become very popular because of those movies. To the point where we had raccoons coming to our yard, and my mother named one of them Rocket. Why not?
Voiced by Bradley Cooper. For
Yeah,
some reason.
he does a good job. It's interesting sometimes when actors do voice work because you realize that they're actually a lot more flexible with their voice than you would have imagined. And that comes up to something that I just recently experienced. Oh, what the hell was? Oh, okay. So the thing I was waiting all summer for that I was so excited about was on Netflix. They doing they released the prequel miniseries of The Dark Crystal. Dark Crystal is one of my favorite movies ever. And years ago, there was going to be a movie, and that fell apart, and they had to turn it into a comic. But now, yeah, they did this the wonderful 10-part episode. I'm 8 episodes in, so I'm very close to the end. I love it. I think it's really great. And what's interesting is they have a very diverse, cool, interesting cast. Simon Pegg is in it, and he plays the Chamberlain, who is also one of the characters from the movie, one of the evil Skeksis. And I had no idea that Simon Pegg could nail that voice. Because unlike some of these other actors that are doing, brand new characters, he's doing a pre-existing character that was, done from the original movie in 1982. He nails it. I had no idea that Simon Pegg could do that. Like, because it's not anything like a normal human voice. It's a weird, exaggerated voice. And he absolutely nails it. So I was really impressed by that. Yeah, that has a really cool cast. Especially for the Skeksis. Like one of the Skeksis who's known as the Gourmand, which is the guy that's always stuffing his face, is voiced by Harvey Firestein, which is pretty funny. Seems appropriate, I suppose. But yeah, but I'm really happy with that. I'm really thrilled because my whole life I've adored that movie. So it's so great to see like something new of it and just done so well. And it's all just like in the original spirit. There's no digital effects. The only digital effects in the movie are to remove things. Like if they're in the shot, they have to have like a puppeteer or a person. They digitally remove them. But everything else is, it's all puppets. It's a completely created world. It's so great. But yeah, I'm really happy with it. I'm sure it's going to have a really depressing ending though, considering the way the Dark Crystal opens. Because the whole point is when the Dark Crystal opens, all the Gelflings and stuff have been wiped out. So I'm thinking, are all these Gelflings just going to die? Like, it's going to be really depressing. But anyway, nobody spoiled that for me. But yeah, really thrilled with the show.
So is that um, Jim Henson's son? Is that who's doing that?
Oh, I assume he's involved, but you've got other people too, like Brian Froud, who was sort of like the main creative person behind the movie besides Henson, and there's one of the producers is a Henson, a woman. I don't know if it was his wife or daughter or what. I'll have to look into it, but yeah, I feel it's sad too. It's too bad that Jim Henson died when he did. It's really tragic that he couldn't be around to be involved in this because it's really wonderful. And I'm glad that's giving some exposure to it because I think it was always sort of a lesser known movie. Like even when you talked about that, people talked about Labyrinth because it had David Bowie. I like Labyrinth; it's a lot of fun. But I mean, of the two movies, to me, Dark Crystal is easily superior and a really great movie that was just really influential to me through my whole life. I really, really enjoyed it. When I first got my high def TV, it was the first movie I watched on it. I pulled out that DVD and watched that, and I was like, "Oh, it's beautiful." So whenever this series gets released on Blu-ray or whatever, I will definitely get it, even though it's available on Netflix. Although maybe not right away, because I haven't bought the Daredevil series yet, and that's like the best thing.
Oh,
But
is it
yeah, that's
out?
right up there for me.
It's
Or
out on
is it?
Blu-ray.
I figured it must be. Maybe I'm wrong.
You know, I know they were at one point putting
Do
that
they
stuff
purposely
out.
hold back Netflix originals?
Yeah, I mean, I know they were doing it on like DVDs, and I thought they quit altogether.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that because I would really like to own that. Like I said, I'm still from the older thing. I know that it's always accessible to me, but I would like discs. I would like extra features. I'd like
Yeah,
all that.
there may be a
You
day and a
think such a
time
great?
when they put up a new paywall. Oh, you need to pay this much, or something.
I know. Ugh.
You never know what's going to happen with that kind of stuff.
But anyway, I'm really thrilled with the Dark Crystal, even though I haven't seen the whole thing yet. Like of the Netflix originals that have been released, it's one of my favorites. Daredevil's my most favorite. This might even be second favorite. And although the other Marvel ones couldn't live up to Daredevil, I still really liked most of them. And Voltron Legendary Defender, I thought that was very good. Really great reimagining of that show with a lot of care. Again, just a lot of care and quality. Like it wasn't just like, oh, it's half asses. One I was just not that I was exactly disappointed because it's not like I cared that much about the original show, but I could not get into that She-Ra show. They made like a Netflix original She-Ra reimagining, and I did not like it one bit. And I mean, the original She-Ra and He-Man shows were not great shows. They don't hold up. They were very much sort of the disposable cartoons of the 80s. They were there to sell toys. They didn't have good storylines. A lot of it was bad. So I'm not so even though I'm one of those people that remember some of those shows and loves them, that those aren't that. But anyway, this new She-Ra's, I didn't like it, but a lot of people like it, so that's good. But at the same time, I couldn't be as excited for it anyway because I never really was into She-Ra that much. I watched it, but it's not one that holds up. It's not one where like, yeah, I need to own that on Blu-ray or DVD. No. But yeah. What's another one? One was an anime. It's really weird and confusing, like a lot of animes are called Be the Beginning, I think it's called. I hope a second season of that comes out. I really like that.
Yeah, I like a lot of the stuff how it takes chances. I like how they give creative control to these guys that wouldn't have gotten that in another television or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I like that a lot. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it's great. So
Yeah.
I think it's turned out really cool. A lot of cool stuff's come out of it.
Hmm.
That had it come out on another avenue, it may not have had
Yeah.
the same.
It's to the point where I've bitched a lot about TV in general anyway, and I'm not trying to pile on, but it's gotten to the point now where sometimes if something I'm interested in is announced and it's actually just going to be released on network TV, I'm kind of disappointed because I think it probably won't be that good. For instance, The Stand, they're going to do the Stand miniseries, and it's coming out I think on CBS. To me, that doesn't seem like the right move for something as cool and epic as The Stand. It seems like it'll just be watered down and boring.
It's
Maybe I'm
probably going
wrong.
to be on CBS All Access too. It's not going to be available
Oh,
like on regular television. I would imagine.
yeah, because I mean, I'm not even a huge fan of that. Although it's one of the only books of his of like the last 15 years I kind of like, which was Under the Dome. The Under the Dome show just threw the book in the garbage, and it drove me nuts. Like I watched like 3 episodes, I was like done. But I love The Stand. It's one of my favorite books, and I still have a soft spot for the original miniseries for all its flaws. I still really like a lot about it, but I just feel like this new, like, yeah, if they were said it was going to be on HBO or Netflix or something or Amazon, yeah, but CBS, I don't know, doesn't seem right to me. I'll give it a chance because why the hell not? But I don't feel too optimistic.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I don't watch network television for the most part.
Yeah, no, I don't at all really. I'd have to have like a really specific reason to do it. So yeah, I don't. My TV habits are the same as they've always been. Is I try to record movies off movie channels when I get them, and I like TCM. TCM's a good thing to have. And besides that, I watch like reruns of cartoons I've seen a million times, like I don't know, like Family Guy and Futurama and stuff. And when it's in a few more weeks, it'll be hockey season, and I'll watch hockey. And those are like the things I watch on TV.
Yeah, sports probably the only thing I actually watch live.
All right, and I
Um,
watch MMA events when I can when they're
yeah,
not pay per view. I'm really pissed that the hurricane hit right when there was a big UFC and Bellator one on the same night, and I had to miss both.
That was a good UFC too.
Yeah, a lot of finishes and stuff.
Yeah, a lot of surprises.
I wasn't surprised by the main thing. Like, Poirier might have been on a great run, but I did not expect him to have any chance against Nurmagomedov.
That guy's just so good, man.
Yeah. The ultimate question will never be answered because it's a hypothetical. It's kind of like the same thing when you're comparing eras. Like, what would he be like against, like, prime St. Pierre? Like, that would have been the best fight ever. If you can't do it, there's, like, St. Pierre fighting him now, no good. But if St. Pierre, like, of 10 years ago fighting him, that would have been amazing.
What weight class?
Because they have such... I'm sure that Nurmagomedov could do welterweight.
He'd be a small welterweight, though. Or George is like a massive welterweight.
That's true. George has never fought at lightweight, but he always said he was capable of doing it. I don't know if you believe that or not, but I think he'd be capable of doing for one fight.
Yeah.
At least back then, maybe not now.
Yeah. Because he fought...
welterweight was perfect for him, though, because even when he went up to middleweight, his very last fight, when he won the middleweight title from Bisping, like, he didn't look right. Like, I think it affected his cardio. I think it made him slow down. So, like, for some people, it's hard to tell with the weight. You've heard me bitch and wring my hands about weight classes too many times and weight cuts and stuff. It's very hard for me to understand a lot of it, but at least in the case of him, it felt like, yes, he was in the perfect weight class. It was exactly where he should have been. Other guys, they're always jumping around anyway, especially once they win a belt. Now I want to win a belt in another weight class.
That's so stupid,
yeah. Which is something kind of refreshing about Nurmagomedov, as he said, like, I don't have interest in, like, moving up or down to, I'll just defend this belt, which is what you're supposed to do, which is good.
Well, I want to see him beat McGregor again.
Yeah, very satisfying.
They're trying to get that going.
And actually, now that Poirier has also lost to him, Poirier says it makes sense for him to fight McGregor because McGregor beat him many years ago when they were both young and unknown. I don't know. I only want to see McGregor come back to get another beating, like you said.
Well, they weren't unknown when he got beat. I mean, he was making his way up through the weight class.
You know what I mean. Yeah, you're right. They weren't unknown, but they weren't stars.
That's what knocked him off his first time. He was trying to get the belt. His chance at the belt.
Yeah.
But,
plus, Bellator had the opening round of a featherweight tournament, which I was really interested in, and I missed all those. Because their heavyweight tournament was stupid, but the featherweight one looks... And the welterweight one was pretty good, and the featherweight one looks like it'll be the best one. And at least it'll move along faster. The heavyweight one took like a year and a half to do. Like, it doesn't feel like a tournament if, like, the rounds are separated by 6 months. But anyway. But yeah, so I'm just really annoyed that I read about the results of both those cards, but I didn't bother looking them up or to watch them or anything. And I'm pissed that I get to see them. The next 2 UFC ones, I think, will be on TV, I think, because they're not pay-per-views.
Yeah, I missed the one that was in China.
Yeah.
As well, a couple weeks ago.
I only watched the end of it. It was in China, right? So it all took place, like, really early in the morning, right? So... I saw the title fight where the Chinese fighter Zhang took the title from Andrade, and I was like, wow, she's awesome. I think a lot of people expected it more because they thought Andrade won the title by a fluke, because like, oh, that slam was a fluke. It's true, she was getting beaten up by the other one until she slammed her, but I don't know, I still give her credit, but yeah, Zhang's pretty awesome. It's nice that there's finally an Asian champion. Horiguchi would have been champion if not for the buzzsaw that is Demetrius Johnson. It's funny now Johnson's over fighting in Asia, which he likes. He says he gets a lot more respect over there because it's true. I think the North American audience is less interested in flyweights.
What is he in? One? Is that what he's fighting with?
Yeah,
that's a great fighting league.
It really is. I really enjoy it. Lots of cool talent.
The timing.
And Horiguchi had a non-title fight with some like guy people didn't know, and the guy beat him. So that's really interesting too.
Lots of talent over there. Lots of. The only thing is you have to kind of set your clock. It's all the same.
It's always been like. It's always like in Malaysia or somewhere. But yeah, it's good stuff. Now it's the time of year where I'm really champing at the bit for hockey to get going. On the 15th, the preseason starts, and the official season starts October 2nd. I actually really like preseason because I like getting a chance to see, rookies and new guys to see if they'll get a chance to get in. Even if they're not going to make the team, you want to see them play and stuff like that. So all that stuff really interests me. Of course, right going on right with a lot of teams is there's several really I can't think of words tonight. Oh my gosh, that are all like having contract issues, or they're all like holding out. It's like, get this settled before fucking training camp, you prima donna assholes.
I
You make
know, man.
so
I
much
hate that
money.
stuff.
I know it really turns you off any kind of sport to hear them quibbling over. It's like guys making $9 million, but it's like, I deserve 10.5. Like, because it's always about they want what they're worth. I'm like, fuck you. You're not worth anything. You're not a brain surgeon. But anyway, yeah, so I hate the business side of sports. I mean, I understand that's necessary, but it's like the most annoying thing when I turn on like a radio talk show or That's Hockey or something like that, and all they talk about is the business stuff. I get why they have to talk about it, but I just want to talk about what the power play is going to be like.
I think it's a lot of dick measuring stuff. Like, oh, this guy over here is getting that. I'm
Oh,
better than
exactly.
him, so I want more than him.
Exactly. And really, my team, the Leafs, has sort of painted themselves into a corner with something they did last year, and now they're paying for it very much. And it really didn't work. So we had this player, William Nylander, who is one of the better players on the team, but not one of the stars. And he held out the longest you could actually hold out, right to the December 1st deadline. And if you go past that, you can't even play. So he missed 2 full months of the season with this, got a contract he mostly didn't deserve, then proceeded to have a terrible season. He just couldn't catch up. I think just missing the time was too much for him. And now I'm just terrified of that happening. Now we have Marner, who is one of our superstars, who's led the team in scoring for 2 years in a row. And yeah, I'm terrified of him missing time. Like, just get it done. I'm tired of hearing about like your love of the game and wanting to win and loving playing for your city. No, it's always money. It's always money. It's never enough. You know, really makes me want to hate athletes. But anyway.
Yeah, that's like they threaten to strike, or they actually do strike it sometimes.
Oh man, I've already been through it twice, or technically 3 times with the NHL. 3. They're worse than any other league for it. And twice they have in 2020 in 2012-13 was the last time they took out half the season. In 94-95 they took out half the season. In 04-05 whole season. They're like the only, I think, of the professional sports to miss a whole season because of that.
So all the books have like an asterisk next to it.
Yeah, it's like Stanley Cup winners, blah 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 blah. 04-05, no winner. There's one other year where there was no winner in Stanley Cup, and it was only like the second year that the NHL existed. It was 1919. And it wasn't because of a player strike. It was because that was the year that we had that crazy Spanish flu that was like killing half the world. Remember? World War I ended, and everyone's like, "Oh, great, the biggest global conflict is over. Now we can." Oh, Spanish flu is killing everybody. So that's why there's no 1919 champion. But there's no 04-05 champion because of a collective bargaining agreement garbage. But anyway. Yeah, it's all infuriating. But anyway, we can circle back to the film to wrap up, I suppose. We've talked about some other topics, as we often do. But yeah, I was really happy to see this movie again after so many years. I remembered it as a really good movie. And I'm glad to say that seeing it again reinforces that. Yes, it is a very good movie. Maybe it got a little too much hype and praise at the time, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that because I think it helped elevate Brazilian film and get it some international attention and acclaim. I think its approach is really great. The fact that it relied on just sort of people from the area rather than trying to get a bunch of actors, and their acting workshop technique really paid off, I think, with the approach they took about using a lot of improv and stuff. It gives it a very authentic and realistic sort of feel. I don't feel like it glamorizes anything. I think it shows like how sad and destructive that lifestyle is, and also how hard it is to sort of get out of it when you're born into certain circumstances. I mean, that's sort of true for almost any country, really. Countries have poverty, and poverty often leads to crime, and you get sort of that vicious cycle going. I don't feel like any of the violence is glorified, because one thing, the violence certainly isn't stylistic. It's not like watching a John Woo film. there's people shooting guns and killing each other, but it's not, crazy gun kata or anything like that. So I really disagree with the critics that talk about there being some sort of glorification of violence. And there certainly, I don't think, is a glorification of the criminal lifestyle. Yeah, it shows how it sort of pays off, but it also shows that, like, the most successful criminal is Little Z. He still winds up dead. And even at the height of his power, he's really upset and unhappy. It leads to the only person in the world he cares about getting killed. So, yeah, I really take issue with any critics talking about a glorification of violence or the lifestyle. I don't see that at all. And as far as like focusing on a negative aspect of Rio de Janeiro, okay, so what? That's this movie's focus. There's, this movie is not the history of all of Brazil or the history of all of Rio de Janeiro. It's a specific area told from a certain point of view. So I don't know.
Oh yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, it's
So yeah,
like with any, you can't say like Goodfellas is, glorifying violence, even though it, has a lot of violent stuff in it. I think it's kind of like, you know, crime pays. You do the
yeah,
crime, you do the time.
yeah. And I like this movie for like how it distinguishes itself from that sort of movie because in a way, it's less complicated. Of course, like it's mostly the drug trade and killing and stuff. Whereas a lot of that mafia stuff, it has a lot more to it. There's stuff with union contracts and all this other stuff getting in the way. And this movie shows like there's sort of limits to how far you can rise in this area. Like as powerful as Little Z was, that was really as high as he was going to get. It wasn't like he could suddenly be driving around in limos or wearing or that kind of thing. He was the king of where he was, but he wasn't really going to rise any higher. So it distinguishes it from, say, criminal activity, organized crime in other parts of the world. Whereas, yeah, this is organized, but it's still not completely organized. And then there is bigger organized crime going on in the area that they touch on at the end, specifically something like the Red Guard, which again I think is somewhat of a funny name drop, but it's also very true. The Red Guard is a big, very big organized group, and they're very powerful and dangerous. And yet you have these kids, these preteen hoodlums, saying, "Oh, we'll just wipe them out," because they don't know anything about them. So yeah, I think the movie does a really good job of showing sort of that trajectory when you're like kids growing up in these favelas or slums or shanty towns or whatever you want to call them, and how somebody like Rocket, who really doesn't want to be involved in crime, how difficult it is to uh, stay clean and stay out of it. It's not just about making money. Even sometimes it's just about staying safe. This what you hear about all the time about like gangs in America too. There are all sorts of kids and stuff that say, I didn't have a choice. It was join the gang or the gang was gonna, fucking kill me. I think that's pretty valid reason to join a gang for sure. So I think the movie succeeds for what it's trying to do. I don't think it's overly ambitious. It has its focus. It's just focus on these characters and this environment. It's not trying to do too much or cover too much. It covers a certain amount of time, and it does touch on real history. Obviously, it's a movie; it's fiction. There's stuff that's made up and or stuff that's embellished, but as far as I know, it still is some pretty accurate representation of crime in those areas at those times. And as Jay and I said, to this day, crime is still a pretty big problem in Rio de Janeiro and other parts of Brazil. So, did I lose you there, Jay, or is it just your picture? Okay, so Jay might be off. I don't know. So I better keep talking. Although this was going to be sort of us wrapping up, but I can't stop the show. Jay only Jay has the power to stop the show. So I need to wait for him to come back so we can do an official ending. And hopefully he can come back and give sort of his final thoughts too on the film. As I said, besides just being a good film, it's made me realize that I've got kind of a blind spot when it comes to South American cinema, Brazilian cinema, and I'd like to check more out and see some different sorts of movies. It's an interesting realization to know that I actually saw another movie by this director. I've seen Blindness. Of course, Blindness is not specifically a Brazilian movie, but it is a movie based on a Portuguese book. So I guess there's your link. I don't know, but that's a pretty good movie, and I'm really interested in that upcoming Two Popes movie that I think is going to be available uh, on Netflix in December, so I'm gonna definitely look for that. Again, that's not really a Brazilian movie. That's got Anthony Hopkins in it and other people from other countries. But still, yeah, I'm hoping this will start me on a path of checking out some other South American cinema because I consider myself someone who's seen a lot of foreign cinema. It's almost exclusively European and Asian, so be interesting to delve into something else like Mexican, Central American, South American. I've seen a few Mexican films, and no, they aren't all just by, say, like Robert Rodriguez or whoever. But kind of at a loss. I hope Jay can come back soon so we can wrap. But I have to follow the rules. I can't just do dead air. You can't do dead air. So I'm trying to think of what's going on. Else is going on here. Let's see. I looked up some stuff about Brazilian film. I've got the Brazil Cinema of Brazil tab open here for Wikipedia, which I'm going to read later. No point reading it here. But yeah, so this movie was 2002. Got its international release in 2003. Oh yeah, and of course, City of Men came out in 2007, and I never followed up on it, so that's something I want to do. So, oh, there you are. That's good. I was saying to the audience, I can't finish the show. I need you to finish the show.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's no problem. So I was just doing some summing up and then some probably blathering just to keep things going. So if you have some summing up thoughts on City of God and such, we can do them now.
I mean, I think it's a really interesting. I think something that we haven't seen before. Definitely a period piece in that part of the world.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that, so it was interesting to me for that reason alone. But it's a really competently made film. It's lots of really interesting techniques used,
Mm-hmm.
and unique way of storytelling.
I like how they did sometimes they did some split screen action, which actually was kind of
Yeah.
cool. There was a time where when they're at Benny's going away party and they follow Benny walking through the crowd while they keep the other screen on the other characters.
Mm-hmm.
There's the part where Steak delivers the message to Carrot's gang about if they kill Knockout Ned, they'll leave him alone. And then he takes off, and then they're talking. They send somebody after him so that the screen splits and shows somebody chasing him down in the streets and bring him back. There's probably at least one or two other times when they did that. Works pretty well. I don't think it's overdone. They do it maybe two or three times.
Yeah. Oh no, no. I think that's really cool to show the what's happening at the same time. Different scenes.
Yeah. At
That's
one
really
point,
interesting.
there's like a weird fake out scene where when the brief foray into trying to be a criminal, where Rocket and his friend are hitchhiking and they're like, we're going to rob this guy, and I don't know, maybe think they kill him or whatever, and like, we can't rob this guy, he's cool. But before they get to that part where they show them driving, then all of a sudden it cuts away and it shows, remember, a police scene on the side of the road, and they're like getting a body. And you're like, what? Did they actually murder that guy? It's like, no, it's actually just a completely unrelated murder that comes back later when they show it's some guy that worked for Little Z, like, murdered his girlfriend, and Lil Z is gonna like kill him because it's like there's no killing in my slum. And Benny once again talks him out of killing the guy. I'm like, I don't know, Benny. Usually I'm on your side, but this guy actually did murder somebody. Maybe Little Z killing him would be a good thing. But anyway, I'm not hearing you. Are you muted?
Sorry, I'm
There you
muted.
go. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I was just saying Benny's just like a stoner who he's just always high and like just chill, man, just chill.
Yeah, and he just really wants people to like him and be popular and be friends with everybody. And he got to a point where he's like, maybe being like this right hand man in like a criminal organization isn't the best way to do that. And he's all ready to retire to a farm, smoke pot, and listen to rock music, he says, with his beautiful girlfriend. And it all goes horribly wrong. But yeah, I think you really feel for a lot of these characters, even some of the less sympathetic ones, because again, you understand, you know, you grew up in like a good, stable environment, and you were able to make choices for yourself, and you were safe. But imagine it's a reality parts of the world where you you don't have these options, you don't have these choices. And I was saying when you were off the air before that sometimes it's not just about joining a gang because you're like joining a gang is the only way to get ahead. Sometimes it's like you've even heard about this in like cities in the U.S. where they'll say like it was join the gang or the gang kills me type thing. So very difficult, dire situations.
You're either with us or against us type.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
which I think is kind of how gangs work,
Pretty much.
from what I've heard.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm glad we finally got a chance to do it on here. I know we've talked about it for a while.
Yep. Me too. And I'm glad that the subtitles on Amazon Prime were pretty decent. I was pretty worried about that coming into it, but it worked out, so that's
Yeah,
good. But yeah, really, really enjoyable movie. And as I said, it's not just an excuse to rewatch something I hadn't seen in a long time, but it's also an excuse to try to maybe delve into some more Brazilian cinema, not just for the show, but also just for my own, to expand my own horizons. And because, as I said, I've watched a lot of European and Asian cinema, but South American, no, not really at all. So it's an interesting avenue to go down. But as far as the avenue this show is going down, uh, do we have one more movie planned?
we did. I don't remember what it was though.
Yeah, because I thought we had three movies planned: 1941, Brazil. Shit, I think we had something else planned. I might have to go back and watch the 1941 one because I think we say it at the end what the other one
I
is.
think I've got
I
it.
think we
I
do.
think I've got it
Oh,
on the
okay.
list here.
Okay.
Um, no, that's the wrong list.
'Cause damn, I remember looking at them and picking them out.
Not Breathless. Is it Breathless?
No, I mean we could definitely do Breathless, but I don't think that was it. I mean, Breathless is one that we are going to do at some point for sure. Huh. Well, anyway, I'm pretty sure that I mentioned it at the end of last show, so I'll just have to check that to be certain. And after we do whatever the next one is, I think we're going to move into something of a theme or whatever, or a series if you want to call it, in honor of October and how we usually kind of do like scarier, darker stuff for October. I think we have something of a theme coming up for about 3 or 4 movies for that, and I won't reveal that this time, but next time I will reveal what that theme or series will be. I think it's a pretty good one, and I think it'll be pretty cool. But yeah, so sorry that I can't remember what the hell the third movie was or what next one is going to be. I will find out, and we'll maybe announce it on Twitter or something. I can't believe neither of us can remember because yeah, I'm sure that we thought of 3, and yeah, 1941 was the first one because it was more of a comedy, and then City of God and something else. I'll probably remember once we're off air. But anyway, we do have something coming up for next week that we just can't remember what it is, but we will find out and remember. And then after next show, we will embark on our October or whatever series, which I think is going to be pretty interesting and exciting. So we'll let you know when that time comes. So until then, thanks so much for being with us and watching. Again, we're a bit later and not on our usual day, but a bit discombobulated. This time it was just the hurricane kind of put me behind. It would have been difficult to do a show last night. I probably could have, but it would have been a bit rushed. I don't know. And as far as technical, and we're trying. We're sorry about if the quality has dipped the last couple of shows. We're in a bit of a spot trying to figure things. Is been doing the job, but it's also been causing problems, some audio issues, and as you've seen, Jay's cut out a few times. So I don't know if that's all StreamYard or if it's something else, but we are trying to work towards a solution where we can get back to having our shows run a bit more smoothly. So yeah, we'll keep at that, and if anybody has any suggestions, we're open to those too. So anyway, so that's going to do it for now. This was City of God from 2002. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and we'll be back very soon with whatever the next episode is supposed to be. We'll remember. All right, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Peace.